Hey now. Oh wait, I was supposed to do hey nows. Hey now. It's your boy PSA Sitch here with another short Wednesday stream with everyone's favorite sunglasses enthusiast, Adam Friended.
Look, you got sunglasses too now. We're
I know,
set.
look at this. I look like a cop, which is appropriate, I guess.
I know, especially for this story, right? What's going on?
Yes, so
Are we arresting President Biden now?
impeachment inquiry was announced by House Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And
Inquiry, huh?
yes, an
What's
inquiry.
that? Look,
Yes.
he's just asking questions. Is that what's going
He's
on
just
here?
asking questions. So I figure we'll watch him sort of announce this, and then we'll watch also maybe on C-SPAN. He kind of goes into it a little bit more, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay. I mean, our friend Kyle Kalinske is probably really scared about this, right? There's a clip floating around about Kyle just destroying people over how great Biden is.
Oh, yeah.
So this is probably
I've heard
making him
such a thing.
nervous,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Look, if you come out with such a heavy Biden endorsement, then all of a sudden
Hmm.
he's impeached for corruption.
Right,
I mean, I'm
right.
going to be nervous about that.
True, true.
Kyle, leave yourself a way to retreat.
Eyewitnesses have testified that the president joined on multiple phone calls and had multiple interactions. Dinners resulted in cars and millions of dollars into his sons and his son's business partners. We know that bank records show that nearly $20 million in payments were directed to the Biden family members and associates through various shell companies. The Treasury Department alone has more than 150 transactions involving the Biden family and other business associates that were flagged as suspicious activity by U.S. banks. Even a trusted FBI informant has alleged a bribe to the Biden family. Biden used his official office to coordinate with Hunter Biden's business partners about Hunter's role in Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company. Finally, despite these serious allegations, it appears that the president's family has been offered special treatment by Biden's own administration, treatment that not otherwise would have received if they were not related to the president. These are allegations of abuse of power, obstruction, and corruption, and they warrant further investigation by the House of Representatives. That's why today I am directing our House committee to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. This logical next step will give our committees the full power to gather all the facts and answers for the American public. That's exactly what we want to know, the answers. I believe the president would want to answer these questions and allegations as well. This effort will be led by Chairman James Comer at the Committee on Oversight, in coordination with Chairman Jim Jordan for Judiciary Committee and Chairman Jason Smith on Ways and Means. Now, I do not make this decision lightly. And regardless of your party or who you voted for, these facts should concern all Americans. The American people deserve to know that the public offices are not for sale, and that the federal government is not being used to cover up the actions of a politically associated family. Now, I would encourage the president and his team to fully cooperate with this investigation in the interests of transparency. We are committed to getting the answers for the American public. Nothing more, nothing less. We will go wherever the evidence takes us.
Thanks for watching.
Okay. So,
Wow.
okay. So, what you say, what does all that mean? Okay. So, an impeachment inquiry doesn't mean that they're going to impeach Biden. What it means is that they're looking if they should impeach Biden. Now, apparently, this grants the House committees some additional investigatory powers supposedly. There is some contention about how much extra power this really gives them and whether they could have just investigated this stuff on their own. Because the big complaint here from people on the left is, well, all these things that he kind of goes through, these are allegations. They're not really charges of any wrongdoing. They're just saying, oh, well, we see a bunch of things here that look suspicious, right? And then the left's response is, well, if you think they're suspicious, just investigate them. You don't need to have an impeachment inquiry to investigate them. And the right's response is, well, no, being in the impeachment inquiry mode grants us additional powers to subpoena documents and to subpoena people to testify. Blah, 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 blah. Right?
Sitch, does it give them the power of invisibility?
It does not. No.
Oh,
no.
Damn, that would have been useful.
Right. Yeah, because then they could have snuck into Hunter Biden's apartment. And
that's exactly what I was thinking.
They could have found all the secret emails where he talks about giving all of his money to his father, Joe Biden.
Okay, I guess we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. So what exactly does subpoena power give us?
Well, so there's a couple things that they brought up. One of the big things that they brought up is Joe Biden, he gave some sort of transparency of his income report when he became president. And he listed, that they made, I think something like $20 million or $17 million, some amount of money he and his wife made primarily through his book sales and his speaking engagements and her speaking engagements. And also, I think she's like a professor at some college or something. But if you looked at his tax returns, which he also put forward, there's $5 million supposedly that's unaccounted for that he got that he did not include in his transparency report. And so it's not exact. So they're saying, well, where did that $5 million come from?
Well, Sitch, I occasionally accidentally get $5 million in income that I forget where it comes from. So, I mean, this is an innocent mistake anyone can make, right?
Right. And so, and then the conspiracy is furthered because there was some amount of money it's not exactly the same. It's not like 5 million, but it's like 5.9 million or something.
Oh,
that
almost 6. Nice.
That supposedly Hunter Biden was paid like $5.9 million or something from China for doing some sort of lobbyist work for some Chinese company. So obviously people say, well, there you go. The extra $5 million must be the money from China.
But is he a registered lobbyist for China?
Well,
I mean, that could be in trouble too.
That's the interesting question. And I'm kind of surprised more people haven't pushed on that. Because if you remember, what's his name? Flynn got hit with the not registering as a foreign lobbyist charge. Yep. And the thing is, so you have Hunter's working for Burisma, and he's working for this Chinese company. And to my understanding, he did not ever register as a foreign lobbyist. And so I do find it strange that not that many people on the right are really, I've seen some of them, haven't really been pushing for him to get hit with a foreign, it's called a FARA, a foreign, lobbyist registration violation, which is a pretty significant charge to get hit with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what would you call what he was doing if it wasn't lobbying? I mean, obviously
Burisma was 100%
exactly.
I don't remember if the foreign lobbyist thing, if it's only for foreign governments or does it include for foreign businesses? Maybe that's where they'll try to wiggle out if it's because it's for foreign businesses technically. I mean, for foreign governments, and he was working for foreign businesses technically. I don't know. Though obviously I think Burisma does obviously have government connections, and I'm assuming obviously whatever Chinese company has Chinese government connections. So
just to be clear, so on the foreign lobbying thing, is it you are lobbying the U.S. government for a foreign power? Or you are lobbying on behalf of the U.S. government with a foreign entity?
The first thing, it's if you are lobbying on behalf of a foreign government
or company, maybe
for a company. If you're lobbying for them and trying to get something from the United States government,
right? Okay, that's it. All right,
right.
So, what's the next step for this?
Well, okay, so. But there's another thing he brought up too, which is kind of funny, which is he brought up this trusted FBI source, made this claim that
is it anonymous or
yeah, it's so annoying because it's like, there's some the FBI has some report, some piece piece of paper somewhere that they didn't even feel comfortable. I guess they had enough faith in to like produce it until the Republicans forced them to produce it, which is an anonymous source claiming that he heard specifically from the president of Burisma that he asked Joe Biden or whatever to fire Shokin. And it's
really?
Yeah. And it's like,
that's
okay.
big
Yeah,
if
that
true.
is all right. And I'm like, that's big. And you should go investigate that and find out who said that to see if it's true. But everyone's running around assuming it's true. And it's like, oh, so now we trust anonymous FBI sources. The entire time there was any investigation in Trump, and there's a million of these anonymous FBI sources, and the left would be like, oh my God, we got them. And then you look into it and find out it was, BS. You think people would have learned to not trust anonymous FBI sources.
Look, maybe I'm wrong about the timeline. You can correct me if I am.
Mm-hmm.
If so, Burisma is having trouble with Shokin. Shokin's MO.
No.
Hold on, just let me finish the timeline. You can tell me.
Well, you're wrong, but yes, continue.
Okay. Well, Shokin's MO is to start bogus investigations with companies and steal stuff from them and or take bribes to end the investigation. That's like his bread and butter.
To be clear, I don't know if it's 100% known that Shokin did that. It was known that lawyers under him did that, who one of them was his friend, and when they were trying to investigate those lawyers, he stepped in to stop that investigation.
Of course, because he's taken. Look, they're working. That's their job, working for him. He's on the take.
I'm just trying to be as specifically clear as possible.
Okay. But anyway, so that's the MO in the department. Now, if I'm at Burisma, and this is Shokin's MO, I'm thinking, look, this guy's a big headache. Well, if I am corrupt, if I'm stealing money from my company, and I've got him corrupt, so I can just give him bribes and I can rob the company blind, then I want a corrupt prosecutor.
Right.
If I'm not corrupt, if I'm an honest businessman, Shokin's a big headache for me, and I'd rather have somebody who's not corrupt in that office, who's not going to be shaking me down for money, right?
Right.
So is it a possibility that Burisma hired Hunter Biden to kind of deal with this situation B, where the owner of Burisma's an honest guy and he wants to get rid of Shokin because he's fighting corruption? Yeah.
I mean, it's possible. I think that's unlikely because, well, for a couple reasons. I think it's unlikely because, first of all, the president of Burisma is wildly corrupt. So
okay.
I think that's unlikely.
I know nothing about him. So
yeah. I mean, the United States of America took his visa away because they felt he was so corrupt.
Okay.
So, right. And
so he probably wants Shokin in that position.
Right. Because so my guess would be, and we don't know any of this, but my guess would be if Shokin did go to Burisma asking for bribes, Burisma would happily pay the bribe because they would feel like he would protect them from any other corruption, which that was the United Nations. I'm sorry, not United Nations, the United Kingdom's allegation against Shokin's office was that they were literally investigating the president of Burisma, and they had held they had frozen like $23 million that he had in a private account, and they needed records from Ukraine to prosecute him. And Shokin's office didn't give the UK any of these records, any of this information.
So he was protecting Burisma then.
I mean, that's how it seems to me.
Okay.
And then this is compounded because Devin Archer said in his testimony, Devin Archer was the guy who was working with Hunter on the board of Burisma. Devin Archer said that the people that were specifically hired by Burisma to be their fixers, that's the people that go around and fix their problems, told him that Shokin was good for Burisma.
Right. Okay. Look, I think like my read on politicians is they're all kind of corrupt, like some kind of low level corrupt.
Read. Right. That's a good guess.
So I'm just trying to figure out what the honest motivation was. Obviously they hired Hunter Biden to have some sort of influence over Joe Biden.
Right.
But I'm just trying to figure out what their dream ask of Joe Biden would be. Would it be to fire the prosecutor as people are claiming, or would it be to
keep him going,
leave the prosecutor alone?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's kind of what we're trying to find out. I mean, because from Devin Archer's testimony, the only thing that we know specifically that Burisma asked Hunter was something unrelated to Joe Biden whatsoever. It was about like creating businesses in America or something, which is irrelevant. But the only thing that we know that would be relevant was that they asked Hunter to try to get the president of Burisma's visa back, or
Oh, yes.
reinstated again.
Yes.
And Hunter was completely unable to do so.
Okay. So they took the visa away because he was corrupt, and he thought, well, I'll show him I'm not corrupt. I will hire the vice president's son.
Right.
Why is that funny, Sitch?
So, but anyway,
because it just screams of corruption, right?
So on the impeachment thing, I'm always a big fan of investigations. I know they've literally investigated this like several times already. I think it's been investigated by the Republicans 4 or 5 times by now. So this will be investigation number 6. But I'm always in favor of investigations, obviously, because it's called an impeachment inquiry. It's going to have a bunch of, not ramifications, but a lot of people will perceive it in a very specific way. People are already calling it a fishing expedition, which honestly it is to an extent. But if they can actually get the name of the quote anonymous FBI source, and if they can actually hone in on and force either Hunter Biden to testify or force the president of Burisma to testify on what the phone call was about in December that they all are claiming they think is when Burisma president told Biden to fire Shokin, that would actually be, in my mind, great, because then we could actually have some evidence one way or the other about what actually happened. So I don't, even though I think this is probably a fishing expedition, I'm still fine with it, just because hopefully this will bring something forward, though I'm not holding my breath. I think there's a very good chance that this investigation or this inquiry will lead to literally nothing, or will exonerate Biden, and then they'll still go forward because, politics. So we'll see.
Sitch, I enjoy fishing, but the few times that I've been fishing and haven't caught any fish, it's been a nightmare. Like it really has. So we'll see where it goes. One last thing, and then we can move on. As far as Tim Pool's Civil War goes, like, is this warring justice departments now? Is this going to be like a regular fixture? Every single president from here until the day I die is going to be impeached. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I mean, it's possible, because it's, this is very reminiscent of Bill Clinton, which was, there was people forget that the Monica Lewinsky thing didn't start as a Monica Lewinsky thing. It started from, they were accusing Bill and Hillary of engaged in some kind of
it was
real
like
estate scam.
Or something.
Yeah, called Whitewater, some kind of real estate scam. And they kind of opened an impeachment inquiry into that just to kind of fish around for something. And then that's when they kind of found out the Monica stuff.
Right.
So, there is precedent for that. And then obviously the Democrats did not impeach George W. Bush. And then obviously the Republicans did not impeach Barack Obama. And then when Trump was president, obviously the Democrats impeached him twice. So will this become a thing? I don't know. I think most Republicans will basically... So I heard some Democratic commentators on this, and they said something very stupid, which is that they were saying that this is bad for the Republicans because Republican voters, they want them to do things. They want them to pass legislation. They want them to help the country. They don't care about this. Which at first I heard that and I thought that was really stupid, because I think most Republicans will look at this and they'll be happy because they'll basically view this as like, oh, all these indictments against Trump are illegitimate and wrong, and this is like revenge for that. I think that's how like 99% of people on the right will perceive this action. Though interestingly enough, I did see the Freedom Caucus, who is like the kind of the Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, the kind of, more further right caucus, who got in the big dust up with McCarthy and everything. They interestingly kind of came out and they crapped all over this, which is kind of funny. They were saying, they were giving the argument that the Democratic news lady was giving about how, we need to focus on like stopping the budget. That's their whole thing, is because there's going to be another budget fight coming up, a government shutdown fight coming up. And that's all they talked about. They all talked about is how we need to shut down the government.
So maddening.
Because there was a theory. Yeah, I know you're going to go crazy about that. But there was a theory that part of the reason McCarthy did this was because he wants to avert a government shutdown fight by saying, well, we can't shut the government down because we need
the resosurces. Yeah,
we need the resources to investigate the the stuff. So
we're almost there. We almost got them. Okay, so that's interesting. Moving on.
Yes.
we forgot to do the intro, so I just want to let people know on the super
Oh,
chat.
you're right.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
so
we're gonna do a second story here, but go ahead.
yeah, so okay, so when we do these Wednesday or Thursday or even maybe sometimes Friday streams, we'll try to read a couple $20 and up super chats at the end, but most of them we will save for next Tuesday. So just be aware before you donate.
We're trying to stay on topic in these. So they're short.
Well, we're trying to get through a lot. So
yeah. And also, I mean, we did a couple of these and they got really good views and responses from you guys in the comments. So
right.
All right, let's move on. What's the next story we're doing here?
So this.
All right, guys, we got a special.
This conversation happened a few weeks ago, but to me, it's so interesting. This conversation to me is wildly entertaining. This was Chris Matthews, who was kind of like a old school news commentator, more of like an old school liberal mindset, went on with Krystal Ball and Saagar, and it became a very, very contentious debate, which I don't think anyone really expected to happen.
I feel like Krystal and Saagar expected it to happen.
So?
To be honest with
so?
you. Yeah. We did Sitch and I did a show with Krystal and Kyle. So Krystal's actually technically a friend of the show now.
There you go. I mean, it wasn't contentious at all.
I mean, it was a little.
I mean, we argued, but it didn't feel like contentious or anything.
No, of course not. No, all of it was in good spirit. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. The contentious part of this is Saagar and Krystal. I mean, they just want to call Chris Matthews an establishment shill to his face.
Yeah,
and he doesn't like that. He's just he sees himself as kind of journalism royalty, right?
Yes.
How would you feel if you were in that position and some young whippersnappers with their internet set came and were like, "You establishment shill."
Well, it's funny because
you had the opportunity to change things and you didn't, you piece of garbage.
Yeah, I think what you just laid out is basically exactly part of the contention. I mean, Krystal used to work in MSNBC the same time Chris did, so it's not like, she's a complete outsider from the network.
True, that's a great point.
But it really is like, they represent sort of the young, new populist energy that kind of wants more radical reform, and Chris is sort of a more like old, pragmatic liberal who's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's funny, you're not going to be happy with it because he does criticize MMT in this conversation.
Well, I know that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk. Look, I'm on Krystal and Saagar's side here. I'm like this stodgy old establishment shill. I mean,
listen,
get out of the way.
You can be on Krystal and Saagar's side. I'm mostly, obviously, I don't agree with his critique of MMT, but I'm mostly on Chris Matthews' side in this conversation. So
you notice this Breaking Points logo? I mean, how do you evaluate that logo in the context of Tim Pool's Civil War? I'm just curious.
It's the Civil War, yeah.
We're at the breaking point.
Yeah,
look at that.
Look at that.
All right, let's get into it.
So the first part, it's not super contentious, but he says something that I think is very interesting and insightful. So let's jump in.
Has done this, and he has.
But if he's done better on these areas, why are they tied? And then you also have obviously all the indictments. I mean, this man may be fake.
Okay, so to be clear, I'm skipping the question.
Talking
the question
about Biden,
was, she's saying, why, if Joe Biden is doing well, why do you think Joe Biden is, not destroying Trump in the polls? Why is Trump still doing well in the polls?
Do you have a take on that, Sitch? I mean, he is a walking corpse,
I kind of agree almost
right?
exactly with what Chris Matthews said.
Oh, okay. Let's hear
facing
it.
Prison time by the time the election comes around. Why is it a jump ball? Isn't that show some weakness on the Democratic?
The other side, I think it is charisma. I think Biden may suffer from that. I don't think he has the charm that Barack Obama had or Reagan had. I think I'm writing about that now. I mean, who's good on television? Let's be blunt. Who's good on television? In politics, that matters. Trump is good on television. When he says something, he doesn't reconsider his words. He says it once. He doesn't say, I mean it, folks, literally, folks. He just said it.
Yeah.
And when Trump speaks, it's loud. And I think that's powerful stuff. And Reagan could do it. Barack Obama could do it. Jack Kennedy could do it. Roosevelt could do it on the radio. But Biden does have that problem. He's older too. He's 80.
Yeah.
His problem is the gravitas doesn't come through. I think that's part of it. A lot of this is cosmetic. And let's face it, a lot of politics is how you look, what do you sound like.
So I think this is a great point. Obviously, I think Trump is way more charismatic than Biden. Biden used to be better when he was younger, but even then, Trump was way better. I think, and it's interesting, I had not thought about what he was saying until he said it, which is that, Joe Biden kind of adding these folksy, let me tell you, I mean it, kind of repeating himself. On one hand, I think, he's trying to hit that folksy level, but I don't think it's as persuasive as just being more decisive in what you say. And I think one of Trump's biggest talents is his ability to be super assertive without being overly angry in the tone of voice.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's a great observation. It's true. Yeah, he doesn't seem unhinged in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Like we always hear the reporting that like behind closed doors, he's unhinged, right? That's like the reporting. He's like screaming, he's unhinged, blah, blah, blah. But then whenever you'd see him, which maybe is true, I don't know. But whenever you'd see him from the camera, usually you wouldn't see any of that come out. He seemed to be, calm and collected and sarcastic. And I think that's actually a good metric for everyone if you want to be more persuasive, is to be able to be very assertive without coming off as too aggressive.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Are you convincing? And even if the policies are good, he's got to go out and sell them.
What about Kamala Harris? Do you think she's a good heir apparent for the Democratic Party?
I think she'd have a hard time winning a general on her own.
Why's that?
Did he make a mistake?
Because I don't think that she has gone out and talked to the American people. When you're running for office, you have to make yourself likable. You have to make yourself likable. And this guy, DeSantis, isn't able to do that. He doesn't know how to do small talk. He can't talk to kids. He can't talk to regular people. A lot of people have had this problem. I mean, John Kerry had this problem. Walter Mondale had this problem. A lot of people have come off as too official.
Right.
They don't know how to talk to regular people. W could do it like a bandit. He may have been, he took us into the wrong war, but he knew how to talk to regular people. And that talent hasn't come from the Florida governor.
Isn't it? It's sad that, what he's saying to me is so hyper true, but it is also kind of sad that that is such an important part of being president, is something that shouldn't really have to do with being president, which is your ability to talk to like a random schmo and come off as likable.
I don't know, because it is somewhat of a sales job. It really is. You're out there selling America to the world, right?
Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe
so. There is some aspect of that, yeah, and I think that's why people fixate on the charisma thing. I mean, if our president is going to go negotiate with China, sure, they have to be strong, but you get so much more just by being likable.
Of course. No, okay, that's a good point. It's one of those situations where, like, in a perfect world, you'd want the person who's like the charismatic face of the president to be like one person, and you'd want the person who does the policy to be another person. But obviously that's not really, you want both the magic person. Though I'm sure like a lot of this is, relegated out to like, chief of staff and other things who will probably operate in that function. But
of course it is, but I mean, it would be interesting if we had a system where we were electing two candidates instead of a president and a vice president, something more like a domestic president and an international president. So you had a different type of running mate.
Right. I'm thinking more like you have the person who's the face of America, because I think you're right. You want the president to be this symbolic representation of the country.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So you want that.
And you don't want that person to be uncharismatic, right? America,
of course.
Come on.
Right. That's the person you want to be like the face and the voice. But then that person might not necessarily be like the smartest in terms of policy or something.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like if you were electing candidates that were kind of a package deal, which you kind of do with a president and a vice president. It's just in
Right.
our particular system, the vice president has literally zero power. So
Yeah, they have only whatever
Yeah.
the president gives them, essentially. So.
which I mean is great if you're in a situation where you have someone like Kamala Harris. You're like, thank goodness they have zero power, right?
And Kamala, for some reason, Kamala thinks she comes off as a prosecutor. Like she's talking about people that disagree with her on abortion rights. Well, they're not wrong. I mean, they may be wrong in your thinking. You may disagree with them, but they're not evil, you know? And
See, look at that. People that disagree with you on politics are not evil.
Wrong.
Okay.
No, look, he does come off as the Haitian here. So
Yes, yes.
look at the look on their face, on Krystal and Saagar's faces, though.
Well, it's interesting because at first I'm like, "What is the problem with this?" But you'll see when you see where this goes. Kind of
Right there.
like
Look,
this answer.
they're both thinking, okay, here's the point where we jump him. Are you ready?
Well, it's because basically I think, and to kind of give a little spoiler, I think the answer they're looking for is the reason Biden is not popular is because he's not left wing enough.
Right.
They don't really want to hear the it's a charisma problem.
He's not an economic leftist.
Yeah. That'd be my guess as to what the thought process is.
Right.
And that's not, and portraying it, always being on the attack doesn't make you popular. Now, make the list of all the popular prosecutors there are. I mean, they're just not. And,
Right.
And I think you have to tell stories. If I were in her corner, and I used to do this for a living, I'd tell stories about growing up with a tiger mother, an Indian American
Racist.
mother. That must have been really tough. You had to have all A's. You know what it's like.
Yeah, it's
you can
tough.
imagine what it's like. You know, and then
Yeah.
tell her what that's like. What's it like having a Jamaican father? What's that? What is that mixture of two cultures? What was that like? Tell us something that brings you into your life.
Yeah.
And
Although-
everybody tells the narrative. Bill Clinton was the best in the world.
He was good.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you have to tell your story so people say, you know what? That's not quite my story, but you know, I think it's interesting. I want to follow that person.
Yeah.
And she doesn't do that. And I don't understand a politician who doesn't try to be liked. And I think Jack Kennedy, people used to say, I've written a lot of books about him, that everybody thought he liked them. That's a talent, that people thought that he liked them.
Well,
Does that come across with her, do you think?
the American people don't think so. It doesn't really matter what I think. The American people don't seem to think so.
You know, some people come off as Michelle Obama's very popular, but she doesn't have that approving voice either. It's not common. Hillary didn't have it. It's not getting people to do what you want them to do. It's getting them to like you first, and then they might do what you want them to do.
But isn't
you
there
have to
something
convince
more-
people. By the way, politics is simple. You have to like the person.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
so simple.
I mean, that's the first step.
That is super high social intuitionist model right there.
Yes.
Like before you can persuade anyone, got to get them to like you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's
right.
number
And-
one.
Yeah. And, I think with Kamal, I think he's exactly right. She spent most of her career as attorney generals and prosecutors. She was I think she was a senator for one term. I don't know if she actually completed the term before she was tapped for vice president. So it's not like she's some sort of career politician known for making herself likable. But even though, you can get, as a politician, you can get a senator's seat or a House seat or even governorship. And it's just very different than being the president or the vice president in terms of what people are looking for and how to appeal to them.
Of course. Yeah.
But to go back to
And
the
trust
Biden,
them. And trust them.
Yeah, and to go back to the Biden critique, isn't there more though than just the messaging or the cosmetic or his inability
think
to
it is?
convey gravitas? Well, we're asking you.
I'm asking you.
because
Well, it
when
is
you
good
look
luck.
at the-
Why do you have to repeat yourself?
When you look at the
These are-
numbers, though,
sure.
It's funny. See, he senses. He's like, "What are you looking for?" Right?
I know he knows what's going on here.
Yeah.
Look, he has interviewed all kinds of very important people, so
Of
he's
course.
been on their side of the table. He knows what's up.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'll look it up. He was a commentator for like ever.
Yeah, he's kind of messing with him a bit.
Do
Waits
you
for
think
her
so?
to.
You think he's
Oh
messing with
yeah,
her?
he's stepping on what she's saying. He knows what he's doing.
Well, he does have even when I like used to watch his show, he would interrupt people a lot. So it's just kind of he has a very kind of interrupty talking style. So I
Right.
don't know if that's indicative of anything.
It's hardball.
Yes, yeah. He began his hardball show was in 1997. Jeez.
I mean, it might have been hardball back then. I remember when I was watching it was kind of softball. So
It was hardball, and then it became the Chris Matthews show in 2002, and then I
Right.
think it went back to hardball again at some point. But anyway,
When you look at the numbers, in terms of how people are doing economically, you do have this mixed picture. I mean, the White House can rightly point to low unemployment rate, as you did. But when you look at the percentage of people who are food insecure or struggling to pay their bills, $1 trillion in debt, credit card debt, we just hit that milestone as a nation. So there is real economic.
Well, there's people living at the
there.
age where they can't raise $300 if they need to. You've seen these studies.
Yes.
Exactly.
You can't raise $300 right
So
now.
isn't there more to the problems for Biden and why he's tied with Trump?
Well, then
than just
there's
simply
always
the
going to be
cosmetic?
problems. What you've just established is the American condition. It's always going to be like this.
Well, but that's very nihilistic, though. Because we
not
saw,
nihilistic. I'll tell you, Ronald Reagan got reelected in the morning in America. What's the unemployment rate? What do you think his unemployment rate was?
I don't know.
7. So, I mean, you can't just quantify and say...
Yeah, but it's not just about where people are. It's where they feel they're going.
Okay.
And so during the pandemic, for example, there were a lot of problems. There was a lot of pain. But you also had a child tax credit.
okay, well, wait. So I want to interrupt you. I agree with both of them here, because there's always going to be some economic issue, and I think Chris is mostly correct. And I think Krystal is kind of making the mistake here, which I talk about whenever I talk to someone on the left, where they think people vote based on policies, when I don't think anyone votes based on a policy. They based on a moral intuition, and the moral intuition leads them to kind of post hoc rationalize and justify a policy that would align with that moral intuition.
Right. Well, I do
And-
think the economy plays a major role in.
No, I agree. I agree completely. The economy plays a very large role, but people, as I've said a million times, people don't understand economic policy. And
No.
they're not voting on economic policy in terms of like thinking about it from a rational perspective. It's
No.
more like, who do I trust? Who do I like? I'm going to trust and like their economic policy.
I think it's even simpler than that. I think
Mhm.
I was at this point when I gave Biden a shot, and now I feel like I'm less or more. And they're
think-
like, if
yeah.
I'm less, let's give somebody else a shot.
I think that's the way it used to be. It's very interesting.
Mhm.
I sent you a few days ago the electoral map of JFK.
Oh, I remember,
And
yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because you
Completely
see like,
backwards.
yeah, you talk about how there was no flip. It's like not all, but most of the southern states were like voting for JFK and Democratic. Texas was blue, California was red. The voting for Nixon. But it's interesting. Then if you kind of go through the elections in like the 60s and 70s, you'll see, and even the 80s, you'll see these massive flip-flops where like one election, like everything's red. The other election, everything's blue. You just see these like huge flip-flops back and forth between like how the country votes. And I think in that time period, for the last 50 years, there was this sort of, am I doing better than I was? If I am, I'm going to vote for the current guy. If I'm not, I'm going to vote against him. I think that was kind of the way the thought process worked for a lot
You
of
don't
people.
think it's the same anymore?
I don't. I think now everything has become so hyper partisanized and partisanship based that people don't view it in that perspective. They say, well, if Biden took office and I'm worse off now economically, it must be still the Republicans' fault.
Well, obviously the tribalists are going to think that way.
Yeah.
But the decision is made in the middle with the kingmakers, the
sure.
independents, the people who will switch parties and vote for someone outside of their general party.
Yeah, maybe. I think with Trump, it'll be difficult to tell because he changes the calculation for everything. So I think it's hard to use any Trump election as an indication of what it means for broader trends or policies in the country.
Yeah,
In
this
terms
election,
of like how people
you can't
vote.
look. You can't tell anything from this election,
Right, because there's so many people that I think are not just normal tribal Democrats who would never vote for Trump. And there's so many people that are not normal tribal Republicans who would never vote against Trump. So it's
Right.
kind of hard to make on that.
And just if it's Trump Biden, it's exactly the same as last time. How do you?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how you process that. So
in place that genuinely reduced child poverty. You actually had homelessness significantly reduced because you had eviction moratoriums, you had expanded access to healthcare, and you had actually suicides went down.
Why is
So
Trump running even in Michigan?
Hold on. So it is possible to improve the material condition of Americans. We've seen it throughout American history. We saw it just now in the pandemic when the government wants to deliver. So to throw up your hands and say, well, this is just the American condition.
$2 billion.
I don't think that's accurate.
We're running $2 trillion in debt in full employment, which is basically full employment. You can't have more expansive economic policies than that. You can't. You blow the whole thing.
You did, and it worked very well for people.
Where?
It worked well for lots of people who had more money in their bank account, and where childhood poverty was much lower.
Well,
when was this?
During the pandemic. And then you also had, let's talk about the FDR era. I mean, we had a New Deal that, built out the American middle class. This is the era you were growing up in,
I know where you're
right?
coming from.
Lower inequality. So these things are possible. You can't just say, this is just how it is.
You spend more money.
What do you think of that, Sitch?
Well, it's funny. Okay, so to be clear, because it might not be super clear, basically, Chris Matthews' argument is, the inflation
We're
is
broke.
Yeah, well, he's not making the argument that we're broke. He's saying inflation is going down. The economy is very hot right now, and where the unemployment is very low. And he's saying, what government policy exactly is going to improve economic conditions at that point without just spending more and more and more money, putting the country more and more into debt, which obviously you don't like because he's complaining about debt and spending money. And she's saying, well, we spent more money during COVID and we spent more money during the New Deal era and things were better.
Well, I'm asking, what do you think? Because I think we're moving into a New Deal era.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are at the breaking point. And I think there's going to be a major restructuring of society coming in the near future where government is going to have a lot more power. And we are likely to get something like UBI out of that, which would be another kind of New Deal-ish type program.
Mm-hmm.
And you have Chris Matthews here doing we're broke, we can't do this.
Well, he's not saying we're broke. He's saying that the government has already leveraged so much money and it's gotten the economy to like a good enough point for the economy to take care of itself. That's the argument.
Look, unemployment is not a good measure. Unemployment can be at 3%, and everyone could be working in sweatshops not making enough money to actually afford a home or to have a family. So, I mean, an unemployment rate of 3% means absolutely nothing.
Well, it doesn't mean nothing, but I agree. You can say it's not the end all be all of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you've got unemployment at 1% and everyone is basically working for slave wages in a poverty type situation, and the middle class is shrinking, the pitchforks are going to come out. I think we're getting close to the pitchforks. I really do.
To answer your question about the pitchforks coming out, I think it's really dependent on what happens with the economy and what happens with the next election in terms of, it seems like in terms of pricing and all that stuff, it's always like lags behind whatever the economy is doing. Right. So inflation went up and there was all these supply chain problems and prices, went up really high. And now it's like all the supply chain problems have been fixed and inflation's coming down and prices are still high. And so the question is, will prices kind of start to go back down again, to match that? And if prices do start to come back down again and everything kind of reverts back to sort of a normal, I think that would go a long way to diffusing the sort of revolutionary energy that you're talking about. If prices don't go down, even though the economy basically fixes itself for whatever reason, whether it's private companies being evil or there's some other economic factor at play, or the economy collapses or has some sort of massive recession, depression, which I know the doomsayers are predicting, nowadays, then maybe we'll get more into this UBI kind of world that you're conceptualizing.
Well, I think it's coming, whether you like it or not, to solve the problem of automation. Which I do think prices are going to come down because obviously production is going to go up.
Yeah. But
that's
okay,
what
to be
drives
clear, I'm talking
down.
about like in the next 1 to 2 years. You're talking about.
I'm
like,
talking about the
20
next
years.
20 years.
Yeah, right. I'm not talking. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just talking about like in the next 1 to 2 years.
Right.
Obviously, when automation comes and takes over everything, and we have machine learning and robots doing everything, then we'll have to have UBI or something to that effect. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Of course, but the sentiment is changing now. This is the time
We'll
to
see.
get. This is a time to get structural change.
We'll see.
Yeah,
Spend more money.
and tax the rich.
Oh, okay. How are you going to do that?
You're going to tax the rich. I mean,
how do you do that?
the wealthiest among us.
Who
Trump
runs
gave
the U.S.
Trump gave them
Congress?
a
Who
gigantic
runs the U.S.
tax
Congress?
cut. The wealthy, but isn't that the part of the problem?
So what's your argument?
My argument is
The wealthy shouldn't be wealthy, and the Democrats should be running the Congress.
Well, I guess
No,
what's your
my
response, though?
my
Are you just
argument
saying this
is-
is the American condition? We can't do anything more? Like,
Right.
this is stasis. We
All
should
I
just
can
be
tell
locked
you
in.
is
people
we're
should
running
just
at
give up.
something that's very close to more inflation. Very close. So what do? You bring up prices. Look, demand pull. The more money you spend, the more prices go up. Right? Do we agree on that?
Yeah.
no, I actually don't fully agree on that because part of what we saw coming.
So, okay, so that's sort of the main contention, right? Because that's the more classical economic thinking, right? The more the government spends, the more inflation increases, the more prices go up, right?
Yes.
But the MMT conception is, well, not necessarily.
No, he's got it. That is MMT.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
Of course.
So he's got it right.
Look, government spending is what sets the price level.
Right.
If the government went out and decided they were going to double every salary for every government employee, those people would have more money to compete for houses, more money to compete for cars, right? Pretty soon the price of everything is going up because these people are bidding prices up.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so, but right now, and this is kind of, so a good point here is, so the MMT thing is saying when the economy is bad is when the government should be spending money.
Yeah, because you get things cheaper. Why would you want to buy a bridge for half price? Labor's
exactly. And also you're infusing money into the system.
Of course, yes.
But then when the economy is doing good, that's when the government should step back.
Step back, not spend anything.
Okay,
Yeah, and also this is why the Biden stopping the student loan payback is such a bad idea, because that literally could blow up the economy and lose him the election. He keeps a campaign promise, but if the economy worsens and inflation goes up, 2%, he's going to lose the election over that.
Right. Right. Okay, so do you agree completely with Chris Matthews here, don't you?
At this point, yeah. I mean, now is not the time to be spending. But I mean, I think the message that they're saying is really a broader message. And when I'm talking about the restructuring, like a lot of people have this idea that political change comes because, we take out the elites, like we tax the rich. Right. No. We need our elites. Our elites are our business, entrepreneurs, all of that stuff. And all these restructurings of society really come down to a new deal between the elites. The elites hammer it out. And we kind of have that going on here. Look, Saagar and Krystal, I mean, they're both DC insiders. Like, how are these people not elites, right? We have Chris Matthews, the old school elite, and the younger elites here kind of hammering it out. So,
well, it's kind of
an interesting dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this dynamic is super fascinating. But also what's even very interesting is that their positions just flipped. I don't think anyone noticed. So in the first part of it, Chris Matthews is saying, oh, everything's about like perception of like the candidates.
Right.
He was just talking about likability and perception, and they were talking about policy. And now it's flipped because she's saying, because I think what she's saying is true, which is that even if the economy is doing well by some metric, the perception is that it's not doing well for the average person. And so that angers people. And if the Biden campaign comes out and they say the economy is doing great and the average person doesn't feel like it's doing great, it feels like a big slap in the face.
Yep.
Right?
Great point.
And yet he's saying, so she's talking about the perception, and now he's talking about like the facts, saying, well, factually, what am I supposed to, like, what do you want him to do about it? With that won't actually make the economy worse.
Yeah, Chris Matthews is not giving up his 5 rental units. So
yeah,
I just look, it's so like sometimes it's so obvious.
Wow, look at this guy over here.
You don't think?
No, I think what's going on is you agree with his position that if the government were to spend money now, it probably would increase inflation, which would make Biden lose the election. And Chris Matthews wants Biden to win the election.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what's the motivating.
But
thought
like I said, I think we're talking about, a plan for the next 10 to 20 years. I'm not talking about, I guess they're talking about just the election.
yeah,
but-
they're talking about short term. You're talking about long term.
right.
Coming out of the pandemic, the argument was, oh, it's just because of all the big government spending, because God forbid we give working class people a little bit of money in their pockets. At the same time, increasingly we've seen a lot of the price increases were from corporations who decided they could price gouge and use the excuse of inflation to lift prices significantly. Now, that was seen as a fringe theory at the time when it was first floated, like just a bunch of lefty weirdos that think this. We now have increasing evidence that that was a big part of it. We also had, coming out of the pandemic, huge supply chain disruptions that were a real problem, and also the Ukraine war contributed to that significantly. So to just say, oh, they spent money and that's what happened, I think that's a very simplistic understanding of what was going on.
Well,
All right. Well,
Disagree?
I argue that the more government spending, whether government or from the private sector or investment or consumer spending, all that spending drives up prices. All that drives up prices.
so you think we need to spend less?
If you want to have less inflation.
Okay. So we talked here about inflation.
I mean, that's straight MMT, man. Well, actually, it's not really MMT. It's just classical economics.
That's just that's just normal
supply and demand.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they're kind of talking past each other because what she's saying is true in terms of the supply chain and COVID and the war. All that is all things that raise the price,
Right.
made inflation and all that stuff. But that doesn't detract from the fact that, well, okay, so all these factors rose the price, but then if the government goes and starts spending a bunch of money, that can raise the price again or make it raise higher.
Sure, it can.
Yeah.
The thing that will lower the price is lower demand, obviously. The reason why, and Krystal frames it as they are gouging consumers. No, consumers are willing to pay more money, so they raise their prices because you can do that. As soon as consumers stop buying, obviously the only way they can entice them to buy is to lower prices. Very simple.
I want to ask you about the media. I grew up kind of watching you on television. This show, kind of our popularity and the existence of a lot of the internet has kind of been in reaction to cable news, of which you were a product of for decades. Why do you think that trust in media right now is so low?
Too many voices.
Too many.
Too many. Oh, different voices. You can watch Fox and you can watch MSNBC or CNN and you can watch different stories.
So you just think optionality is what has reduced trust?
Trust is the problem of all media because you have to give the whole picture. Like you have to talk inflation, you have to talk prices, you have to put it all together.
Right.
And you're trying to run an American economy that's healthy. And for example, if you talk about Hunter, why not talk about Jared?
Sure.
Well, we do
That's what we
that.
do.
No,
Yeah.
just a minute.
Yeah.
Who else does that?
Not very many.
No, anybody.
Right.
Anybody.
Right.
So nobody talks about the holistic situation of relatives and how they might be exploiting the situation.
Yeah.
Well, that's a problem.
We agree.
Because everybody who's watching, with the Wii U is right here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's limited.
Right.
So who else is doing that?
Well,
Who else is doing the whole picture when they talk about things like, who's
Very
talking
few
about
individuals.
inflation and the problems of the poor and everything else and homelessness and putting it all together, and you're
right.
talking this one point of view, putting it all together. What happens to the average person, the middle class family that has to pay bills? When prices go up, they got to pay. When you're retired, you don't have any income coming in. That's already there. It's fixed. These are realities. You cannot hurt one group and say I'm helping the other, because when you're president, you have to put it all together. In the media, I do think that if you look at who watches MSNBC and who watches CNN, and CNN had experimented with Krystal with going independent, or rather going nonpartisan. It's a very difficult time to go nonpartisan, though.
Yeah.
Because you have to say, well, I don't know whether Trump won the election in 2020.
Okay.
Well, yeah, if you want to say that, I think you're an idiot, but that's all right. You say that and you're saying, I'm not going to deal with factual news. I'm not going to go with which states voted.
Right.
I'm not going with how the electorates were counted, honestly. I'm going to just say, well, they're all the same. No, they're not all the same.
So going over what he's saying here, I kind of agree with half of what he's saying and disagree with half of what he's saying. I do think that part of the reason there has been a complete lack of trust in the media is just because there is so much media out there, and the media has become very, I don't think it's just that there's so much media, it's that there's so much media and the media has all become partisan in order to get eyeballs. That's kind of the way in which media's decided to attract attention, is to kind of hone in on these niche echo chambers to survive. I think that's really the big issue here. I don't agree that, like, it would be interesting if you're going to come out and try to be nonpartisan or as nonpartisan as possible. I think you could have a show. Now, obviously, a lot of people who are Trump people would be very, very, very upset if you had a show that labels itself as nonpartisan and comes out and says there's no election fraud, blah, 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 something that obviously we've dealt with. But I think you can still do it, and I think you can still retain a lot of right-wing viewers and things of that nature without having to just say one way or the other, election stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to come out and call them insane. I think he just, I mean, he said they're crazy. So,
right.
I mean,
yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, I think you can do it. You just got to be sensitive to not alienate people. It's much easier to do partisan media. Really, you can just do it with your brain off. So,
yes, you just say this person is the bad person.
Right.
We are the good people.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the problem, because I've always said this, the number one way to make friends with people quickly is to have a shared common enemy.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, anyone who's worked
unfortunate.
Yeah, anyone who's worked at an office knows this. They're either everyone hates the boss or there's one employee that everyone hates. That's like the best way to become friends with everyone else, is your shared hatred of something else.
Yep.
And I think that
you did a lot of this at MSNBC.
What did I do with the finger pointing?
Well, I'm just being honest.
What did I do? What did I do here?
Well,
it's so good because it is. Look, I don't know if you're interviewing someone if you should point at them. I think was a unforced error.
Yeah, that's so good.
You just say, well, they're all the same. No, they're not all the same. And I think that
you did a lot of this at MSNBC.
What did I do with the finger pointing?
Well, I'm just being honest.
What did I do? What did I do here?
Well,
what did I do?
I saw you do that a lot.
No,
over
I
the
never
years.
did. Tell me what did I do?
I mean, while you were in the chair at MSNBC, specifically during the Trump years, I mean, you're talking about how Fox, every criticism you just gave. I mean, we're also talking about, I watched on your network Russiagate coverage about Trump was an asset from 1987, about selective coverage of all this. I mean, do you still feel good about that coverage? Like, because you're talking about
that is a problem. The problem was that we had a lot of points where there would look like collusion, with the Russians showing up all the time. Russians showing up at conventions. What are they doing at conventions? Showing up in meetings with Trump. All this kind of all those issues together created the situation that looked like it was all connected, and that never was connected. That's a fact.
Okay.
Yeah, and
so it's funny because he said what I've always said, which is that with the Trump Russia stuff, there's all this smoke, there's all this circumstantial evidence, but then when you cleared all the smoke away, it was just smoke. There was never a fire, there was never a gun, there was nothing there, and that kind of broke a lot of people in the left's brains. And I think that's why a lot of people in the left still currently will always forever believe the Trump Russian stuff, because they'll just see all the smoke, they'll see all the circumstantial stuff, and they'll never get over it. Ever.
Is there absolutely no smoke on the election stuff? I feel like there was kind of some smoke. So,
well, I'm talking about the Trump Russia stuff.
I understand, but I'm saying you could make this argument on the election stuff too.
Well,
but on the election stuff, he comes right out and he says, "Look, these people are idiots." Like, couldn't you make that argument about him with Russiagate? Look, you're an idiot.
That's a fantastic point. That is a great point. Was that? And I was going to say this too. So I think that the smoke thing is 100% true with the election stuff. There's all the circumstantial things that people thought looked shady. There's all the smoke there, but when they cleared it away, they couldn't find the there. They couldn't find the fire. And if you're going to, I'm really glad you brought this up. If you're going to sort of be sympathetic to your own failings when you looked at all the smoke and there was nothing there, because obviously they wanted it to be there because they don't like Trump.
Of course.
You have to be somewhat sympathetic to, or you want to be as sympathetic in theory, to the people on the other side with their smoke
If you're
You
a
know what I'm saying?
sympathetic person, but if you're not a
Right.
sympathetic person, you just want to rub it in their faces. Call
Sure.
them idiots.
Sure.
Yeah.
Though at
Which
least
that's what we
right.
see a lot happening.
Right. Though at
Yeah.
least with Chris, he's acknowledging that there was a fact that there was no Trump-Russia collusion, which is what he just said.
Of course.
There's still a lot of people. Now, there's some people on the right that will acknowledge this, that there was no evidence of election fraud whatsoever. But there's still a lot of people that do not,
Right.
or will not admit that are political pundits. They won't
Every
admit, even if
time
they think they won't admit it.
Every time I watch Ben Shapiro, I think Ben's doing the Lord's work here. Ben's like walking him back.
Yeah, because Ben doesn't subscribe to the election fraud.
No,
stuff,
he
right?
doesn't. No. And
Right.
he is very critical of Trump in a look, I want a Republican president. And I think there are better candidates that stand a far better chance in the general. So he could be wrong, obviously. Look, he doesn't have a crystal ball. None of us do. So, but
If
he's
it
got
wasn't
good
for
analysis.
if it wasn't for all the election stuff, and Trump didn't do the nonsense with the documents and all the slate
Well,
electors
and
and all stuff,
January 6th,
That's
I
what I'm
mean,
saying,
if
yeah.
January 6th wasn't a thing, Trump would be like
shoo-in.
20 points ahead in the polls.
Yeah, that's what's so silly about it. Because if Trump didn't behave that way with the election stuff and just accepted that he lost and didn't do any of that garbage, I think you'd basically be almost a shoo-in to win again.
Look, if he was a magnanimous loser, even if he said, "Look, I think I won, but for the good of the country,"
right.
Oh my God! Like, can you imagine? He'd be
Yep.
20 points up right now.
I know. And I do think now this we'll see, because I could definitely be wrong about this. I do think that this the Biden stuff in terms of Burisma and all the corruption, all that stuff, all those accusations, I do think that's going to be the Trump Russia 2.0. All this smoke exists and they're never going to find anything underneath it.
Yeah.
And people will never let it go, though, so it doesn't matter.
Look,
That'd be my guess.
Every war you lose someone who's just still fighting that war.
We'll see.
So, do you have any regrets about the coverage during that time, or
I think whenever you're following a story as it develops, and you look at it developing and developing and developing, and all these points seem to hit, and all the connections with Russia again and again and again, and we never got to the end of the story.
Yeah, but as a journalist, you can't just float things that are wild, like, oh, maybe he was
No, it's not floating things. Every fact we dealt with was a fact.
But we watched, segments about, hey, maybe it was a Russian asset since 1987. Hey, maybe these P tapes, which are unverified. That was on Chris Hayes' show.
Who?
Jonathan Chait said that on Chris Hayes' show. On Chris Hayes' show.
A lot of veracity given to the alleged P tape, et cetera. You don't think the network got out beyond what the facts suggested?
I kind of feel like maybe Krystal was against this stuff when she was there, and maybe, I mean, it feels like she's got kind of an axe to grind here. Like she was in the back telling them, hey, we shouldn't be doing this stuff, and they're like, hey, how about we fire your ass?
Yeah, I don't remember. Let's see, when did she?
Yeah, I don't remember her situation.
She was on the cycle. So the cycle was from 2012 to 2015.
The cycle, I know. What a look.
They were trying to compete with the 5, I think. Even though I think cycle's on at 4, but it felt.
And they
like
had Tariq, that giant racist that we've covered a few times. Oh God.
Yeah, but they used to have someone else, I thought, before Tariq.
That guy. I thought
Tariq replaced someone. But anyway. Yeah, so I don't remember. So 2015, so that's obviously before Trump becomes president. So this was all before, I think, a lot of Trump Russia stuff came out. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where exactly that was, but in the
I didn't realize it was that long ago. Jeez. Wow.
Yeah. But I know that she and I know that she and Saagar have been very anti MSNBC and CNN's Trump Russia coverage, which I think is fine. Because
no one's mentioned Rachel Maddow, and she's the worst offender.
She was really the offender that was like the worst of it. And I think it's totally fine to criticize their coverage. They definitely overshot the moon on it. I don't remember specifically what Chris Matthews' coverage is on it, because Rachel Maddow was kind of the one that dominated my mind in terms of saying crazy stuff. But I don't know, like, I think what he said about, like, there was no there. Honestly, I think in most conversations, that's the best concession you're going to get.
Oh, of course.
I think you're going to get them to, like, be like, yes, we were totally wrong. It's totally screwed up and we're idiots. Like,
I just think it's interesting the juxtaposition with the election stuff. You know, obviously they're losers that should have seen it, is his perspective. And with him, it's like, oh, we could have never seen this coming. Like,
yeah, right. And that would've been
nobody
interesting
ever
to-
stopped to think, well, maybe we're wrong. Jeez,
Yes,
what kind of
yes.
journalist are you?
Yeah. Or even no, so even if you don't realize it, is to then try to go forward looking at other people operating under the same mindset.
Of course.
And say, oh, okay, well they're operating the same way I'm operating, but just on the right side of the spectrum. So
Yeah, good faith Gary him a bit.
Right. Yeah.
Give him some grace.
I think that we did what we had with what we had, and we didn't have enough.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And you didn't have enough. I guess I'm curious, through MSNBC, now that you're outside, you're independent, with your reflections of what went wrong. You know, you started in the 1990s on cable television. The country was a lot more united. Things start to go downhill. You've said here it's optionality. I'm just. Don't you think?
I didn't say.
Well, you said that one of the reasons that trust with media is low is we have too many voices.
You know what I'm talking about. People talking to their audience, confirming what the audience already.
But don't you think that's what MSNBC did? I mean, that's.
Well, you're asking me about MSNBC. Ask me about me.
Okay, I'll ask you. I mean, you were a fixture on that network for decades.
You use these terms.
Yeah.
I was a fixture. I was a product of.
I knew both those words. I was like, can't call him a fixture. Can't call him a product.
Why not?
Those are dehumanizing words. Look, a fixture is something you put in your fucking bathroom. Okay.
Right. Would a better word been like pillar? Because it's like it's objectifying.
Sure,
but still, like,
you're a support.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's better.
Yeah.
You're a pillar of MSNBC. Because I would argue that he was definitely one of the main big voices on MSNBC. If not,
a urinal
probably
is
the
a
biggest.
fixture.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Look, you got to pay attention to this stuff.
That's true. It's a great point. Yeah, there's all these little words and they have all these little implications. Yeah, you're completely right.
Product.
A product
You're just a disposable product.
Yeah. Well, also, I don't know if he left on MSNBC on great terms anyway, because he made some comments that people got very triggered about, and he left shortly after. I don't know if that was related or not, but
yeah.
So
we got to write some of these words down, Sitch, for our next debate. I like these. We got to have these trigger words for us. You're a urinal in here. Oh, I mean a fixture.
I don't think these are causalities. I'm not a function of
No, you're your own
MSNBC.
individual.
Sure.
I'm who I am, and I've always been who I am.
Yeah.
And I may disagree with other people on the same network. I don't know what you're talking about, this we and us and all this thing.
Let me ask a little bit specifically about the 2020 and 2016
Too
Democratic
generic.
primary
It's way too generic.
coverage, because I'm curious about how this went down. You know, this was after I'd been let go from the network, so I don't have any insight into this era. And you would think that MSNBC, being this liberal, progressive network overwhelmingly, and you certainly had your own point of view, that they might at least be a little bit Bernie curious, maybe a little bit, inclined towards Bernie Sanders. You had this overwhelming
Who would be for Bernie Sanders?
Well, I'm saying.
Well, who was?
That's what I'm saying, is that there.
Well, you are. That means you are. Do you think other people should be for Bernie Sanders?
Well, I'm asking
No,
why.
you're
Hold on, Chris. Hold on. Let me get to a question.
No,
okay?
because there's an implicit answer in the question.
No, but I haven't even gotten to a question
typical
yet.
question.
This is such a culture clash here, because Chris Matthews endorsing some kind of candidate. I mean, you could argue that he did to some extent.
He obviously was. Yeah, he was endorsing candidates. Yes.
But he wasn't openly advocating for them on his show. Like, that would be a bridge too far, definitely.
I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've watched Chris Matthews.
I can't imagine him doing such a thing. That's what I'm saying, is like the culture, the culture shock, because young reporters today, if you're not using your job to advocate for a candidate, like, you're morally inept, right?
Yeah, I know. I think I don't remember specifics about Chris Matthews enough to make a strong statement on it. I think the general statement you're saying is correct, which is that the older journalist was more tepid, not all the time, but was a lot more tepid, at least cautious about advocating for specific people.
Yeah, they had the fairness doctrine.
Right, but even after the fairness doctrine, there were obviously journalists that would advocate for very specific people, but it just felt different where it was kind of like, oh, there was the person, there would be like the one person on the network who would kind of be the big shill, and then the other people would be a little bit more newsy, a little bit more neutral
Yeah.
about things. They were still biased, and you could see exactly what their bias was, but it felt a little bit more vague. It wasn't
Right.
so overt, I guess maybe would be the word. And again, you're right, with a lot of the younger, newer kind of journalists, everything is just this very overt, in your face. We have to stop Donald Trump. We have to stop Joe Biden. We have to be in favor of whomever. Like, it's just all very apparent. There's no subtlety to the conversation at all.
But you can kind of see the moral difference between the generations in this exchange, because
Yes.
I do feel like this was just a big no-no in Chris Matthews' generation, that you didn't, as a journalist, you had to maintain at least the appearance of impartiality, even if you were somewhat partial.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, because her big critique of Chris here is because she's obviously a big Bernie fan, and he was very anti-Bernie. And he made a comment that she'll bring up, and we'll talk about.
Oh, yeah. No, they get into the
So,
Bernie stuff here.
right.
Yeah, we'll just get into it.
Cable
Chris.
news network.
Chris,
well, you're
hold on,
answering the
hold
question
on,
with
hold
your
on,
answer with
hold
your
on.
question.
You had, instead of, maybe a variety of opinions or whatever, you had an overwhelming, every single host just completely opposed to it, completely contemptful of the movement, or at times gripped by like sheer terror that he might
Well,
win.
give me some examples.
But hold on. I'm
Give me
asking
some
a question.
examples.
Okay, well,
Give me names.
You did float that you might be rounded up and executed in Central Park if he won. So you also
No,
made
I didn't like
you
Bernie.
also made a
Look, I said
comparison
Bernie
to
Sanders.
Hitler.
I made it very clear.
Yes.
I never said anything about Hitler.
But what I'm
I never said anything about Hitler.
Okay, so there's kind of this confusion that's going on. Okay, Chris Matthews made two statements that got him in trouble. The second one was some kind of Nazi comment, which I don't have pulled up, but that's what he thinks she's talking about. She's not talking about that. She's talking about a completely different comment.
Right, of course.
It was.
Did he get fired over the Hitler comment?
I don't. I mean, I don't know if it's known that he 100% got fired for any of these comments. It's just these two things happened in like February of 2020, and then
he
in
got
March
called into the
of
office.
2020, he was let go or quit or whatever,
Right.
resigned or whatever. So the comment that she made, which I don't think is an accurate telling. She said, "You said if Bernie won that you'd be rounded up in Central Park," which is not what Chris Matthews said. What Chris Matthews said was that Bernie Sanders praised aspects of Fidel Castro's Cuba, and he said
where
if Castro,
people were rounded up.
Right, and he said if Castro and the Reds had won the Cold War, there would have been executions in Central Park, and I might have been one of the people getting executed while certain other people were cheering. So I have a problem with people who took the other side. Okay, so he's saying he has a problem with people that were overt socialists that were kind of praising the socialists during the Cold War. He's not saying if Bernie Sanders won, Bernie Sanders would like kill him or something.
Gotcha.
So
important distinction.
Well, I mean, yeah, very, very important distinction.
Okay, there was I believe a Nazi comparison.
No, I wasn't. No. You have to answer. I didn't float it.
That people might be rounded up, but this is true. You might be rounded up in Central Park and executed if he was president. Okay, so as one example, but you have to say the overall tenor.
I feel like you do if you throw out an accusation.
You have to have the facts right. Yes.
Well, you have to have the facts right, but you have to let them respond to whatever their defense of the statement is. So
unless they're not answering the question, then you talk over them and make them respond.
But we don't know because he never really responds to that.
Right.
So.
Look, he's flabbergasted here. He's like, wait a second. I was there. You totally got it wrong. You're telling me my position.
The coverage of the network was very negative. Was that individuals making choices? Was that like a voice coming down from the network? Or was that a problem of groupthink?
Individuals.
It was all individuals. So at your time in the network.
Who would have talked to me?
Your boss.
We have lots of friends in this town.
Yeah.
You're certainly in touch with the network executives who want to have, be in good with the next administration.
I never got a point of view told to me from anybody in the executive role.
So it's just happenstance that every single person at the network hated this one particular candidate.
I don't think.
So to be clear, what's happening is Krystal Ball's perception is that on high from MSNBC, there was some memo that was passed down, or some feeling, or some boss came in and basically told everyone to be against Bernie.
Yep.
And
Look at that.
right, that was-
Conspiracy.
Right. Well, no, I'm curious because she used to work at MSNBC, so I don't know if she's relating this to her own experience or what. And Chris is saying that he has no clue what she's talking about, and that he never experienced anything like that. And it's possible. Now, I don't know if she's claimed that this has happened to her when she worked at MSNBC, and maybe it did. And obviously, we know when she was working on the cycle, her and the people on the cycle were perceived as more of like the young guns. So maybe producers or executives felt more inclined to give them notes or tell them what to say or something. Where I can't imagine that like Chris Matthews, who's seen as like this old dog, that someone's going to call him in their office and tell him what to say.
You don't know. Hillary Clinton might have given him a hand job.
Well, that's true. That's true. I don't know if the Hillary Clinton hand job, hypothetical possibility, that could have definitely happened. I take it back.
Look, that's why he was so against Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
I think the hate word.
Looks like it from the outside. People can speak to their own view at the time.
I thought at the time, just to put this back in where I'm factual and accountable, I thought when Bernie was headed toward winning in New Hampshire and winning in Nevada big time, and I couldn't see even results coming in from the others, the moderates, from Biden and those.
Right.
And I get concerned that they've disappeared, that they weren't even there. Because in the afternoon in Nevada, we didn't even have any numbers coming in from anybody but Bernie. Bernie was winning that thing in a landslide.
Right.
And anybody who'd been through 1972 knew what happens when the Democratic Party goes that far left. And if you put a person like Bernie Sanders up there, it looked to me like a rerun of 1972.
McGovern.
Okay. And I saw McGovern got beaten in almost every state. And I thought that was wrong for the Democrats to do that. I thought Bernie was probably, or Elizabeth was going to win. And of course I wasn't happy with either one of them.
But what do you think?
Why would I be happy with people that are probably going to lose?
That's your opinion. I mean, that's not what the polls were showing in terms of how he was performing in hypothetical matchups against Trump, both in 2016 and in 2020.
Well,
but you're allowed to have
that's
that
an
opinion.
argument. No, it's not an opinion.
You're allowed to have that opinion.
So it's kind of interesting because, from Krystal's perspective, and I think there's some truth to this, Chris doesn't align politically with Bernie Sanders. Thinks Bernie Sanders is a socialist and is too far to the left and all that stuff. But he gives the argument that from his perception, part of his dismay, because he was very dismayed, and he made some comments that people were relating to Nazis or something, that he was very dismayed when Bernie was winning these early primaries in 2016 over Joe Biden. And he's giving the argument that his dismay was primarily because he didn't think Bernie Sanders had a ghost of a chance, or not
of winning the general.
Sorry,
yeah,
this would have been Hillary, not Biden. Sorry. Would have had a ghost of a chance defeating Trump, I guess in 2016.
He couldn't win the general. Yeah.
Right. He couldn't win the general against Trump in 2016.
He thought Hillary could win the general.
Right.
Look.
Right.
I don't agree with him. I think Bernie would have stood a better chance in the general against Trump, but I mean that's can't rerun it. So
right. Well, first of all, the interesting thing is about this is, number one, he's trying to look at it from a more pragmatic perspective. At least that's what he's claiming. And I think there gets this problem because a lot of people who are much further than the left, they just assume that the people that are against Bernie or whatever are more like establishment shills or, neoliberals or, something to that effect. Like there's more of a malevolence to it as opposed to like the pragmatic approach to it, which in reality, I think it's both. I think people generally disagree with something and then they try to make a pragmatic argument to justify to other people who don't agree with them why they're right still.
Sure.
So there's a little bit of both going on. But, I used to agree with Krystal's position and what you just said, that I think Bernie would have stood a better chance of beating Trump in the general election because the energy at the time was very establishment versus revolution, and Bernie was a revolutionary character. So I know I'm conflicted because on one hand I want to say I think Bernie would do better, but on the other hand, if it really was Bernie versus Trump, and Trump whipped out the Bernie Sanders is a socialist. And that became the entire beating of the drum in 2016. Bernie Sanders is a socialist. Here's a socialist. Here's all the times he's been a socialist. Here's all the time he's praised Cuba. Here's all the times he said he was a socialist. Bah, 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 bah. I don't know if he could have won at that point.
Yeah, I don't either.
But I mean, it didn't match up with the
Well,
polling
let me
data.
just
But let me
tell
ask
you,
though.
no, the Democratic Party got together and they basically, Jim Clyburn in South Carolina delivered a 70% victory for Biden.
Right.
That was enough to convince the others, like Mike Bloomberg and Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, to withdraw. Because they saw, for whatever reason, they saw this heading, and there's only one candidate that could win.
Yeah.
Now,
But don't you think the media played a part in also convincing people like this is the guy that can win? Joe Biden is the one.
if the media controlled thing, Mario Cuomo would be president.
You don't think you had
General
any
Powell would be in. The media has had favorites forever. Right. General Powell, we've had a lot of favorites and they've gone nowhere.
And
Well,
you
we
don't
could
think
put
it
it
mattered?
the other way. Okay, you were at a network and your show was beloved by many Democratic primary voters. You don't think you had any influence amongst those voters?
It was pretty clear that I wasn't. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the people, I thought the people around me were probably with Bernie. I don't think there was an animosity. It's not interesting. It's true.
You thought the people around you were with
like
Bernie.
at the network route?
Or do you mean the people who watched your show?
It's fascinating. So we have this kind of this feeling of how much control does the media have over the outcome, which I don't know. I think it's hard. It's hard for me. I think the media overall creates a tone, and I think that tone has a lot of effect on people. I'm not sure individual commentators making individual choices about things has a lot of impact on the broader conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know that the Russiagate would have been as bad as it was without Rachel Maddow, though. I mean, it does seem like certain commentators can make a big impact on the story and the culture via that story.
I agree completely. But what I should be more specific here is like, if it was literally just Rachel Maddow going off about Russiagate and no one else on the left was going off about it, no, she would have just been seen as like a crazy person in a corner. Like no one would have given her any traction. It's just that everyone on the left was harping on Russiagate, and then she is the loudest voice on Russiagate, so she becomes elevated to the top of the stack. So that creates a tone of kind of a Russiagate narrative.
Or that she is obsessed with it and bringing other people to the story in a top-down way. I don't know which of those is more likely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're saying more like, she is like the one pushing it, and then she gets a lot of views, and then so other people copy because
she makes it socially acceptable to push this crazy idea because she has all this status. Like as soon as she says, I don't think this is real and I'm not going to cover it anymore, maybe all those other voices dry up. But her credibility is what propelled the story. Right. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think what you're saying is a possible outcome of stories. I think with the Russiagate stuff, I don't remember the exact timeline, but I'm pretty sure everyone was pushing it like at the same time. I don't think it was a situation where like she legitimized the story, because I remember pretty, early on the whole P tape and all that stuff, it was very salacious, and like everyone kind of jumped on that story. Like really, I think really that's what got everyone so excited was the P tape, because it was this insanely salacious story from the beginning, and everyone had to talk about it.
Here's the way I see it. I know people will make the manufacturing consent argument that the media is basically just brainwashing everyone.
Right.
But I do think that in the culture, there are certain intuitions that happen, that all the media brainwashing in the world is not going to change.
I agree.
So you have these two epic forces that are constantly in conflict. And if the intuitions of the population are very small on something, very weak, they're easily manipulated. If they're very strong about something, they're manipulating the media. They're driving the story. So it's really these two forces interacting with one another. And a lot of the people that say, it's really only manufacturing consent, or really the media can't do anything, both of those narratives are not really true. They're only partially true.
Right. Okay, well, maybe I'm trying to think because I agree that the media assigns people their position.
To some extent,
To
though,
an
but
extent, they have
like
to
I
work
said,
off of
yeah,
pre-existing moral intuitions.
right,
The thing
exactly.
is that usually, and the thing I've noticed is that moral intuitions are broad enough that you can essentially argue almost anything you can argue almost any issue relating to any moral intuition. You just have to
Sure.
change the way in which you argue about it.
Well,
so that
yeah,
gives,
this is like where scapegoating comes from.
right, exactly. And so that's what kind of gives media organizations like broad sway to argue about an issue. But I think, and maybe the kind of the way to parse this out is that when the media puts out a narrative or an argument, you will see all like the really politically activated people, like the politically activated normies, people that are very focused on the news. They'll all repeat those arguments. You'll hear these arguments be repeated by them because they were basically fed them by the news. And the news kind of, more importantly, I think, rather than feeding people their opinions, feeds people where their attention should be. What is talked about, what is covered, what is ignored, I think is actually the most powerful persuasive element of the media, not necessarily what they say about each individual story.
Right, but there's a limitation to that because if the argument is just ridiculous, I don't think that works.
Yeah, obviously, I agree. But
there's some limitation to it. That's all
yes,
I'm
obviously.
saying.
But in terms of the question that she's asking, like, could, if MSNBC as an organization all came out in favor of Bernie Sanders, would he have won the general election? I don't necessarily buy that, really. So,
right. They're arguing that he couldn't win because they squashed his campaign.
Right. Which is funny because I think, if I recall, in 2008, MSNBC was really pushing a lot more for Obama than they were for Hillary. So.
Oh, okay.
Because he was kind of like the hot new thing. But I think a lot of it was just people were terrible. I think a lot of people probably on MSNBC and a lot of people on the left had the exact same thought that Chris Matthews had, that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and if he runs against Trump, Trump will annihilate him. And they thought Hillary is safe and she's the safe choice. And when people are, I think something I noticed about human behavior is that when people are worried about something, they generally want to go with the safe bet. And people felt like Hillary was the safe bet, and they felt Bernie was the risky bet. And obviously, it didn't pay off for them. But
right, yeah. Sometimes you got to go with the risky bet.
Sure.
I thought there was an ambivalence about Bernie winning, and a sense of this is fine. That's all.
Okay.
No more than that.
And
I was the one horror-stricken that this is going to be a big defeat.
Got it.
And I think you're wrong about thinking that the middle class of the United States who run elections basically, we're not going to like Bernie.
But why do you assert that so confidently? When you
first of all, he called himself a socialist, which is not going to sell
I actually
anywhere.
agree with you that the label was
no,
not
it wasn't
helpful,
label. It was his name. It's what he said.
But Chris, when you look at what he actually supported, things like healthcare for all, those are popular things, right? Living wage, $15 minimum wage, that's very popular. In fact, the student debt cancellation is something that Biden has picked up and has moved forward.
Bernie was able to put forward,
I
thought they were very popular in Vermont, and I think he's very popular winning elections up there, and I don't think it would have solved the country.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the argument that she's making, I hear a lot of people on the more further left make. And again, I just think it's this misunderstanding of there's people, everyone, okay. I guess the way to talk about this is whatever you're interested in, everyone wants to shove their lens of the world through their own interests.
Yeah.
And we obviously do this because we're very interested in evolutionary psychology and Jonathan Haidt and everything.
And politics, everything. Yeah.
Right. Now, I happen to think evolutionary psych and Jonathan Haidt moral foundations is more telling. So I think we were in a better situation to do that. I think where people get into problems is that people that are attracted to a lot of these news positions are political junkies, and more specifically, they're policy wonks, which makes sense because that's why they would be attracted to doing these jobs in the first place. I don't think the average American understands or fixates on policies the way that policy wonks do. And I hear this a lot from people on the left. And I think this is where kind of they're missing the Jonathan Haidt moral foundations here.
Giantly.
Right.
Yeah.
They talk about Bernie was offering all of these things that people should want. obviously they're going to vote for him. And it's like, okay, I mean, that makes sense. And if we look at things in like this pure analytical 2 + 2 = 4 sense, but obviously we know humans don't work that way. And it doesn't really matter what Bernie Sanders promises and how many policies he likes. We look at this with, gun control and abortion, all these other issues, and raising tax on the rich and all these things that the majority of Americans are all in favor of all these quote democratic things, and yet they just can't seem to ever vote for them, is because that's not how they're voting. They're voting based on these moral intuitions, that these Jonathan Haidt moral intuitions they have. And as Chris Matthews put out, whether they like and trust someone, and I think people like Bernie because he was very charismatic, but I think as soon as he gets hit with the socialism stick, I think his trust goes very, very low among a lot of people.
Yeah, and also the trust that he can deliver any of the policy prescriptions he puts forward drops immensely as well.
Yes, yes, of course. Now, let me skip forward a little bit.
Listen, Democrats are not socialists. They're like Roosevelt. They believe in a little more government here in places like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But those issues have all been joined by Trump. Trump completely agrees with leaving Social Security alone. He leaves Medicare, Medicaid alone. He is going completely against the Republican thinking about fiscal austerity. The Democrats have gotten in. I just read this piece about new monetary policy. I think it's wacky. They just spend all you want and print the money. It's in the paper today. Robert Zellick. Print all the money you want and just spend it. Biden and the student loan thing. Print the money and I'll give it to you. Where'd the money come from? Where'd the money come from? Where did the money come from?
How do you feel about that?
Well, it's a straw man of MMT if that's what he's talking about. I mean,
I'm assuming. I don't know what else he'd be talking about.
Yeah, this is a straw man. I mean, obviously, you can't just spend the money. You got to take inflation and real resources into account. This is why it's just such a giant straw man of MMT, because MMT has a perspective that you should be looking at not the bank balances, but the real resources in the economy. Right. And I don't know how you can argue against that position. What you shouldn't look at, like right now, we're living in a world where we don't look at any of that stuff. We just kind of wing it on a wing and a prayer, right?
Right. Well, I think when you have a MMT and they talk about how the debt doesn't matter or isn't as important, and there's a lot of pushing for spending more money, it reflexively makes a lot of people basically adopt Chris Matthews' position, because that's just like the reflex. Oh, we're just going to spend.
Right.
Where's the money come from? So,
about the worst. What are the worst things Biden did as president? You mentioned student loans.
I think there's an old rule of Churchill's that you never promise something you can't deliver.
Okay.
Don't say you can give people free them from student loan debt. It's their debt. They paid them. They made the decision. They're getting their career opportunities out of it. The people in the United States, the middle class and the working class in Pennsylvania who don't go to college, which is the majority of people, they're not going to get those benefits. And yet you're taking them from them and saying, oh, I'm going to just inflate the economy. I'm just going to create more money, drive all the prices up to pay for student loans. Well, that was irresponsible because he couldn't do it constitutionally. He had no right to do that. The courts are not going to back him on this.
Yeah, I mean, they've already vacated in people's payments are going to be resuming very soon. Some commentators we've seen out there have been floating that we're on the verge of a civil war. You love history.
No, let me do it. I'm going to
before we get into that. But so I assume you agree exactly with the student debt comment.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this before,
right? Just
in the fact that, I mean, you really got to weigh that keeping a campaign promise versus blowing up the economy and just losing votes. I mean, I'm looking at $6 a gallon gasoline in Southern California, and I'm thinking,
yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, California is going to vote Republican if that's the case in November. So,
well, California's never going to vote Republican, so.
It's
going to be $12 a gallon. It's
I don't know.
Okay.
Look, if the economy's bad, I think Biden's toast. But that's really it. If the economy's good, I don't see how Biden can lose, even though he's basically a corpse. Just because Trump needs to pick up people who voted for, Biden regret voters, who I'm certain they had a reason that they weren't voting for Trump if they were voting for Biden. Or he has to pick up new voters, and voter turnout is higher than it has been in the last few elections. So where do those voters come from?
I think if it was DeSantis or another Republican who
Oh, he
seemed
destroys.
yeah, I think if it was DeSantis or another Republican who seemed kind of more like standard
Nikki Haley
Republican-y,
could be president at this point.
yeah, like I think, and the economy wasn't doing well. I agree. I think Biden would be in very big trouble. I think against Trump, since Trump is Trump and he's so polarizing and he has all this baggage attached to him, I think the economy would have to be doing so insanely poorly for people who wouldn't vote for Trump normally to vote for him because of the economy. To be my
Yeah.
guess. So, and I don't think the economy will be in that dire straits. I mean, it might be lower, but I don't think it'd be in that dire straits.
Yeah, I don't know.
Get back to you, because this
sure.
argument
Yeah.
about you got to spend more money, $2 trillion over in full employment. We've pushed down unemployment as low as it's ever been able to do. This is the hardest we can ever do in terms of expansionism and social programming and everything that Biden's done. He's probably as left as you could go.
Oh,
Yes.
I mildly disagree. I mean,
No,
the
mildly
story,
disagree.
The beginning
You start
of
with
the
the premise that we
administration-
live in a country we don't live in.
No. The beginning of the administration, there was significant programs and relief. There were checks that were cut. There were pandemic era programs. All of that has been stripped away over the course of the Biden administration. I mean, student debt payments are set to
Yeah, they were for the
restart.
COVID. For
The
COVID,
unemployment super.
they were for
everything-
COVID-19.
Everything that was done during that period was stripped away. So to talk, the story of the Biden administration has actually been cutting social spending over the course of administration, which is why I would argue he's in such a difficult place in terms of electorally, because people's experience have been, I was doing okay. And now, all of these things that were helping me, including, I think, the child tax credit is a perfect example. Those things have gone away. I do think inflation is an important part of that story. I just disagree with the totality of the causes of inflation. But I think that's the issue. But
I think this is a weird argument because I would not look at programs that were put temporarily to try to cover people for COVID during lockdowns. And then once the lockdown ends and those programs go away, that was how they were designed. These were not designed to be forever programs. People were not designed, the COVID checks are not designed to be forever UBI or something to that effect. And I actually think not only would it have been probably bad for the economy to continue these programs indefinitely, but I think it would have been really bad politically because it would completely prove the narrative that all the Democrats do is they say there's some emergency and they have to do something for an emergency, but that's just an excuse to do it forever. And because that's always the Republican narrative. Whenever there's some emergency for something, the Democrats want to do something. And that would completely play into that narrative. And I think we'd be in a much worse state economically. And I think Biden would be in a much worse state if all these programs just continued after the lockdown was over.
Look, society needs to have a conversation about UBI. It can't be snuck in under some surreptitious circumstances. That's
Right. Yeah.
That's not a good way to do it.
Yeah. I don't think it's fair to classify it like, well, they got rid of all these COVID stopgaps, so they were cutting social programs. I don't think that's kind of a fair characterization of.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You disagree that when prices go up, it's because more money is being spent.
I don't think that's the whole thing that's going on.
That is economics.
But it's not
that
economics.
Is economics.
That's what the economics textbook says. But when we look at the Federal Reserve,
what are they learning this at?
Can you let me finish here? The Federal Reserve did research showing that a significant portion, a majority of the inflation was just corporate price gouging. Executives were on calls. You don't have to take my word for it.
Look. They're saying the exact same thing. The corporations raised their prices and people had the money to spend on those prices. If the population didn't have that money, exactly as Chris Matthews is saying, they wouldn't have been able to raise the prices and they wouldn't have what she's calling price gouge. So, they're basically saying the same thing here.
No. They're not
framing it differently.
I don't understand what you're saying.
You understand what I'm saying?
No, I don't understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Because my understanding is that her argument is she's saying the reason inflation happened was because corporations are evil, greedy corporations, and they said, "Hoo ha 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 ha, we can raise.
We are
prices
going to
on
raise
people."
our prices, exactly,
right? Because we're evil and greedy." And he's saying, "Well, no, prices got raised because of the government was spending money, and the more the government spends money, the more that raises prices because it increases, the purchasing power of people, which then the market retaliates or responds to that, I guess would be a better way of saying.
If the government doesn't spend the money and the corporations raise their prices, they're not going to sell as many goods and services because people don't have the money in their pockets to actually buy those things that they want.
Right.
So, I mean, what she's framing as corporate, they're basically just saying the exact same thing. Like she's saying that the greedy corporations raised their prices and that's what caused prices to go up. And he's saying, no, what caused prices to go up is all the government spending that put the money in the people's pockets. So when the corporations raise their prices, they could actually afford them. It's just, it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Right. I mean, I understand. Well, it's so, okay. So you're saying that, right. You're saying that
If,
it's the same
if
thing
the government doesn't look, if there's only $100 in the economy, or there's $1,000 in the economy, you know, obviously there's corporations can raise their prices 10 times and sell the same exact quantities of goods and services.
Right. Yeah, I understand. You're saying that because the government was putting money into people's pockets, that's what allowed corporations to raise their prices in the first place.
Right, and not suffer demand losses. Constantly corporations are raising prices until demand drops off. Because this is how they find out how much money people have, right? Look, people also, they want to charge as much as they can for a widget.
Yes.
If they can sell a widget for $10 and sell the same widget for $20 and sell just as many of them, they're going to sell them for $20, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was a twofold. I mean, there was like three things that happened simultaneously during COVID. Okay, so you have people were getting money from the government. The government was spending money on a bunch of different programs, increasing the money supply. But then people were, during actual lockdown, people were not spending as much money. They were sitting on a lot of their money. And so when the lockdowns ended, not only did you have the government spending a bunch of money, not only did you have the government giving people a bunch of money, but now people had all this money that they had saved up and they want to go out and they want to start spending it. And so, yeah, that's obviously going to create like this mass flux of demand increase, which then you put on top of that the supply chain disruptions. So there's going to be a massive amount of demand increase with a massive amount of people that have a lot of money to spend. Right?
Everybody wants to go to the bowling alley. As soon as the bowling alley has a line down the street, they're like, we're going to raise our prices. Right. And they're going to raise their prices demand, until that line goes away.
Right. Goes back to normal levels. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess I understand what you're saying. So they're both kind of saying the same thing without realizing it.
Right. She's blaming it all on the greedy corporations and he's blaming it on the government spending, but it's both.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
One can't happen without the other. That's why I'm just saying, like, where's the disagreement here?
Yeah. Okay. No, it's a very good point.
Executives were on calls bragging about how they were able to use the excuse of inflation to hike up prices. Okay. So there's an issue with monopolies. Okay. The last thing I really want to get from you, and this is genuine question.
I deal in the real world, and I'm telling you, if inflation rises next year and it continues at the rate, it's going to hurt Biden like more.
I believe I absolutely agree with that.
You like how dismissive he's being? He's like, listen, I don't know what textbook you're reading. I deal in the real world.
Well, look, he's
being hyper dismissive.
Remember what I told you about doubling the salary of every government employee?
Yeah.
If the government wanted to turn around and say, look, we're going to lower everyone's salary by 20%. Now all of those people are going to not be able to buy those goods and services. How are the corporations going to respond when their sales drop off? They're going to lower the prices.
Right. No, even though I agree a lot more with Chris in this conversation, and then they were, kind of attacking him in the beginning of the conversation, which I think kind of set the tone. I do think he's being too hard in terms of, being so dismissive to Krystal in the conversation. I think you can just disagree without being so.
They called him a fixture. What do you expect?
I guess that's what I'm saying, but still, two wrongs don't make a right. You could try to de-escalate the conversation a little bit.
If I'm Chris Matthews, I'm waiting for him to call me a geezer. Like, for real.
Well, I think what's going on in the conversation, he kind of alludes to this later in the conversation, is that he's basically seeing Krystal as kind of this avatar of far left talking points that he's
She is.
I know, I understand that he's dealt with his whole life, and he always feels like ends up in the Mondale situation where they just get annihilated in a general election.
We got to do another conversation with Krystal and Kyle after this. I really want to talk economics with Krystal.
Okay, sure,
Yeah.
sure. I'm sure she'd be happy to do it.
Both agree
No,
with
no.
that. Yeah.
So the era that
But you can spend more money
covered-
and not drive up inflation.
the era that you've covered extensively.
Look, he's laughing about it. It's hilarious.
It's like this Reagan, Clinton, neoliberal consensus. Do you think that consensus failed in any meaningful respect? Do you think that consensus is broken? Are we moving towards a new era, or do you think that it continues apace?
Well, I don't think moderation sells generally. I mean, McGovern beat Muskie. I mean, the fact is that if you have a wild idea and you can appeal to people who are desperate, they're going to give you a shot. And the idea that we can continue a massive welfare program in addition to what we're spending now, I don't know how we can keep doing it. I mean, there's no way you're going to raise taxes. I can't think of how you can raise taxes with a Republican Congress right now. And in effect, even the Senate's not going to do it.
Right. Yeah, I mean.
So where are you going to do it? What government are you going to have? You're talking about the United States government?
But do you think that there were core failures, to get back to this question of where does the populist energy around Trump and around Bernie, where does this come from? And is it rooted in some key failures of that bipartisan consensus, the overlap between basically Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan? You have this
Bill
consensus
Clinton
you have this consensus in favor of deregulation. You have the Iraq War.
Free trade.
You have free trade. You have all of these things that build up to the financial crash. I mean, aren't these key failures of neoliberalism that now you have these movements in reaction to, movements that you very much don't support?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, go
What do you
ahead. Well, no, I'm going to say that the economic conditions have deteriorated, and all this is
Yes.
being driven by material wealth. I do agree
Sure.
with that assessment.
Yeah, and I do agree, and I said this a million times, I think all this stems from the housing crash. The housing crash is
Totally agree.
the pinnacle of the failure of neoliberal economic policies. Obviously there was overlap between the Democrats and Republicans in terms of how to deal with that. I don't think it's fair. She's kind of laying out a uniparty situation, which I don't think that's, as someone who lived through that era, and I remember very vehemently, the Democrats arguing about stuff with the Republicans. I don't think that's a fair way to characterize the situation at all. In terms of thing. And it kind of removes the fact of why Clinton kind of did the more centrist pivot that he did, was because it was literally that's how he won the election, was by doing that.
But the economic conditions were just so different during the Clinton presidency then.
Right. No, but I mean, it's you had, Reagan won off the back of the inflation crisis, and the weak-willed Jimmy Carter, who was like the lefty hippie, or perceived as like the lefty hippie. And this was kind of coming off of the end of the New Deal era of, economic policy, where workers had so much power that it seemed to create massive inflation. At least that was like the narrative, whether you agree with it or not.
Right.
And then Reagan comes in and he's like, I'm going to, daddy's home, and we're going to bring back, responsibility to America.
Yeah.
We're going to cut all this government spending and blah, 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 blah. And that message was so popular that Reagan annihilated in 2 elections. And then his vice president, Bush Sr., annihilated in another election.
Right.
And so then you have Clinton come along, and
But the party was over because George H.W. Bush actually had to raise taxes and ended up losing the election.
Yeah, but so that's the thing. He had to raise taxes, but then on top of that, then he had a third-party spoiler candidate as Ross Perot.
Oh, you're right.
And then you had Bill Clinton kind of come in, and he kind of, said, well, I'm not your typical leftist. I'm your centrist Democrat. I'm just a good Southern boy playing my saxophone, getting BJs. And people are like, you know what? I'm on board with that, because at the time period, people forget this. The time period, the word liberal was so demonized.
Oh, it
and
was,
basically
yeah.
communist. So, and the whole Reagan Bush era really changed politics substantially.
Yeah.
So, but I kind of agree. But I don't think it's true that there was like a uniparty handshake or something.
Support what?
You don't support the populist movements like Trump, like
Trump or Bernie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were there failures in that?
Trump or Bernie?
Were there?
There's a different.
No, they're wildly different. But talking about the animating energy here, were there key failures in that neoliberal consensus that has dominated here for some 40 years?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I mean, I don't know. This is wearing me out. This argument is just, I'm arguing with someone who has no interest
I'm not trying to argue. I really
Tell me where the states are that Bernie people win.
No.
Tell me the states that are for your point of view,
Chris.
because you're advocating here.
He's exhausted, man.
I know. I wish he wasn't, because I do want to hear his answer to this, like if he would actually engage with the question, which he's not, because he's only seeing it through the lens of, well, you want Bernie Sanders to win.
Right.
So unfortunately, he's not really going to answer the question or view it in a I don't know if the honest is the correct way, but like the
what
correct
is ridiculous? I mean, she's fighting a war from 6 years ago. What the hell?
Yeah. I mean, because again, I think you dropped the Bernie stuff, and I get rid of all that stuff. I think that's stupid. But I do think the whole thing about the populist energy is the result of the failure of neoliberal economic policies. I think that's 100% true.
Yeah, but you don't have to couch it in terms of Bernie Sanders' campaign from 6 years ago.
Sure. I agree. But to be fair, when she asked this question, that wasn't her intention to do that. And when she asked him this question, even that's how he interpreted it.
Intending to interview me, but you're really advocating for a social welfare state. And I'm going to ask you, where is it winning?
Well, look at Florida. They passed a $15 minimum wage by 67%.
You're jumping around.
Chris, I'm not trying to argue with you about Bernie anymore. I'm trying to ask you what you really think about the era that you covered and whether it's coming to a close or whether you think that, do you think it's coming to a close? Do you think it served people well? Do you think there were any failures to it? Anything that should have been done differently during that era?
Can I speak?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
I think the Democratic Party, the modern Democratic Party, has been very good at opposing the Vietnam War. And most of it, not at the top, is very good at opposing the Iraq War. And these are real conditions where people get killed. And we killed 200,000 people in Iraq. And in Vietnam, 58 million people, 58,000 people died from our country, and millions of Vietnamese. And we made those decisions on civil rights, starting with the Brown case in '54, and the Civil Rights Bill in '64, and the voting rights in '65, and all those issues, social issues. The Democratic Party, with Republican support in many cases, Midwestern Republicans, were very big on civil rights. Certainly, that's when we had a Northeastern Republican Party, establishment party. And I think in all those issues, the Democrats did the right thing. And even I thought Roe v. Wade was a brilliant decision, because I think even though it was political and it wasn't really a court decision, it was a practical decision. The old joke was that the Supreme Court follows the elections, and they did what makes sense, and viability made sense.
I agree with that.
And so we've made a lot of decisions. In terms of unemployment, the Democratic Party has, under Clinton, balanced the budgets, which I thought was important. Under Harry Truman, balanced the budgets.
I want a moment of silence for all the Republican heads exploding over the activist judges on the Supreme Court
outlawing for the Roe v. Wade decision.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know what I wasn't alive back then. I don't know what the argument was or what the temperature of the country was. Back when
I just look. The narrative is 1,000% different on the Republican side in that exchange, and they just both were like, "Yeah, that was a good decision." Pat each other on the back and move on.
Right. Well, to be clear, he was saying that it was that the Supreme Court took the temperature of the country and went with the temperature of the country. That was the argument he made.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true.
Look, they took the temperature of the Democratic Party. And,
right. I don't know. That's what you're saying. I don't know if that's accurate, but.
Well, no, I think I think every single Republican thinks that's what happened. So.
Yeah. Now
I'm just saying a moment of silence.
In 1973. Okay.
Look, it sounds like you're on their side, that you're completely like, you don't think there were people. Look, there was no, if they're correct about the abortion thing,
right,
it wouldn't have been a contentious issue for 50 years. It got overturned. If they took the temperature of the country and everyone was cool with it.
Not necessarily, because there could be a Supreme Court case and there's a ruling Wait, don't laugh. Okay.
Okay.
There could be a Supreme Court case. And by the way, this is literally their narrative. I don't know if this is fucking true, but this is the narrative, and we've actually covered this before. And I've never done a deep dive to see whether it's true or not, which is that they passed Roe v. Wade, and basically people were mostly fine with it. And then there was some resurgence in the 80s of the religious right to kind of make this a central issue to attack in order to win.
Well, we need,
campaigns.
I've heard that narrative as well.
Right.
So, okay. I guess we will have to do a deep dive on that narrative
Yeah.
sooner or later. Because I'm curious if that's true. This is a narrative that the Democrats always come out with.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's correct. So
I mean, I haven't done a deep dive because it doesn't really matter in terms of how we would interact with the policy today.
well, no, I'm just, look, the way that they said that, I just
understand.
could feel
Yes.
people's heads exploding.
Right.
As
Because they would
if-
interpret it the way you interpret it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they just being the paternal pieces of garbage.
I gotcha. That's a good
I
point.
think they've tried to do fiscally responsible stuff. They have maintained at enormous cost Medicare, and Social Security, which are incredibly difficult and expensive. They've done all those programs for retirees. I think they've been probably, in terms of homelessness and reality, is on the street, not the world you talk about. That world I don't know anything about. But in the reality of the streets, where you walk in San Francisco and you see the liberalism, it is liberalism. It's not left-wing. It's liberal attitudes towards people living in the streets. The graffiti, actually the deterioration of a lot of downtown San Francisco. I think they've been probably too liberal. And I think if you go any further in that direction, it's almost zany. Now, just a minute.
What made you think that? Was it the people shooting up in the middle of the street?
Right.
I mean, come on.
Some of all the crime problems. And,
The backlash is coming, Sitch.
I'm
I
getting
agree.
to talk here because I live in the real world where people like Gavin Newsom can get elected and Jerry Brown can get elected 4 times. And people that are moderate Democrats, or you call them neoliberals, they are neoliberals because they're trying to do something. They're not socialists. They don't believe in the government taking over things. They know that at some point the government gets too big and it's the problem. And they don't believe in all these solutions like you're advocating.
But do you think-
thank God
But do you
there
think
is no
free
Bernie
trade-
Sanders running the country.
But do you
Thank God. No, it's just because you've made your point. I heard all the points. I heard them all my life. And all those arguments
do you think
would
free
be
trade
would mean defeat.
served the real
Absolute
world
defeat.
that you're, places
The
that
real
you're
world,
from, that you
the real world
visited?
I know about. I
Did
had
free
two-
trade serve the
Let me just say, I have a couple of brothers who voted for Trump this time.
Yeah.
Probably will again.
Who do you think is more right in this situation? Do you think Chris, with the sort of older view of socialism is never going to win, it's going to bring destruction to the country? Well, I mean, we agree it's going to bring destruction, but in terms of it's never going to win elections, that's just a dying, thing. Or is Krystal more correct that like this new populist socialist energy, or more leftist, if you don't want to say socialist energy, is kind of like the future of the Democratic Party?
Well, I don't believe in socialism. I think, socialism doesn't work because it.
Right. I'm talking about who do you think's going to win?
Who is going to
soul of the
win this
Democratic,
argument?
party?
Look, I believe in mixed economies.
Right.
And I think Chris
Hold
Matthews.
on. I'm not asking you. No, neither of us like socialism. So I'm not asking what you like morally or prescriptively. I'm asking you going forward, which do you think
Krystal is going to win. Krystal and Saagar are going to
you-
win this.
Okay, you think
This
left
guy, this
socialist
guy's on the
populist
way
energy
up.
will dominate the Democratic
There's
Party
going to be
forward?
look, I'm not speaking in terms of the Democratic Party. I'm speaking
Okay.
in terms of there's going to be a restructuring of society. The economic arrangement is going to be changed relatively quickly here. Things are getting too far out of whack, and I think change is coming, whether Chris Matthews wants to accept it or not. So that populist energy is going to turn into economic change, and
But
how
you think
that
it's a trend of
economic
socialism or something different?
look. That's why I said I believe in a mixed economy. I don't think.
Okay.
Look, we're not abolishing property rights anytime soon. This
Sure.
whole engagement is over the fact that people can't afford property.
Right.
People
right,
want to buy property.
Right.
People are in situations where they're like, I'm in my 20s. I'm never going to be able to own a home. That's not sustainable. I do think that there's going to be a economic reckoning that's going to happen. I really do.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, look, I'm obviously more economically privileged than most. So I understand that is, look, I'm doing fine, but I do know that there are people struggling, and that struggle has to be addressed, and you can't just paper over it and say, work hard or pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Not when people have political power, not when they have the vote.
Yeah, I'm not
I mean,
sure.
do you disagree? I mean,
I'm not sure. I think we missed the mark on the massive change. It could come back if the economy goes into the toilet. You know, I think it could definitely come roaring back.
you're saying we missed our shot?
Yeah, I feel like well, not we. I feel like in terms of this radical restructuring, I feel like the shot was missed.
I think we're right on schedule.
Okay. I think it was missed with Obama. I think it was kind of missed with COVID. And we'll see, because if the economy just kind of putters back into, 2000s mode pre-housing crash, I'm not sure anything's going to change.
Well, then that means people are fine, and I'm
lulled back into the way it was.
Look, then that means people are fine.
Okay, maybe
if people do not rebel politically, then that means they're doing okay.
Yeah,
that's the whole way our system works.
I agree, but it's hard. It's so difficult to tell, because honestly, say Trump loses and Biden wins again, when the threat of Trump is gone, I think then it would be easier to clearly see what the Democratic Party is, because I feel like so much of what is driving politics is pro or anti-Trump, and that takes all of the focus into that. So it's hard to piece out, like, where's the economic policy of the Democratic Party now? Where's the economic policy of the Republican Party now?
Right. We got to wrap up, so
we'll try to get through quickly.
I've got people and I have relatives I will not even argue with because they disagree with me. There's a lot more people on the other side than from your side. I think that Trump, probably in the latest polling in Pennsylvania, is 1 point ahead.
Yeah.
In Michigan, he's even. Virginia, he's running even. I think he's probably going to pick up a couple points in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Because every time the courts go after Trump, every time the prosecutors go after Trump, every time they go after Trump, and they're all right in these cases, I believe completely right, his microphone gets bigger. He is louder, because if you attack somebody, they have a right to respond. That's the key thing. When America is, if you're under attack, for whatever reason, you get to talk, and you get a lot of opportunities. So he's going to have, I don't think he'll go to this debate this week. I think he's probably going to wait outside. He may even get arrested during that time. He may do anything, but he's not going to let Chris Christie grab the front page of the New York Times away from him, because all will be is Christie attack him, and he's the liberal pinup boy right now. You'll hear about him a lot on MSNBC and CNN. You'll hear a lot of him because he's the liberal pinup boy. He's their guy, and they know he doesn't have a chance in the world of beating Trump, just like Bernie Sanders does in the world of beating anybody. Anybody.
That's not what the poll said, but
what poll? Give me the poll.
There were all kinds of polls.
No, give me one. Just give me one now in real time. No, you're not looking them up. Tell me the poll. No, give me one poll. I'm just challenging you and your basic idea. You have the platform here. You have the platform.
Hillary Clinton was the electable one. How did that go? How did she do at beating Trump?
You can't turn to polls, though, when all the polls said Hillary was going to win by 8 points. So I don't.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
What is your argument?
Yeah. It is funny how it's become so the Bernie thing is just completely dominated.
Look, the polls were obviously wrong, massively wrong in that election.
Right.
Yeah.
This is called whataboutism.
You're making a case about who would have won. I can tell you who didn't win. Hillary Clinton didn't win.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the person who at that time. Your network this was the one who's electable,
I was pushing Hillary Clinton. I was pushing Hillary Clinton as a candidate.
I'm going to be respectful.
I like Sherrod Brown. I like people like that.
Yeah.
I like some people on the left because they have an ability to talk to people the way they live, and not this performance.
Sherrod and Bernie have some labor supporting.
I don't.
Wow.
Look, you have a point of view, and you brought it to this table, and I'm trying to defend against it. I'm just saying the more moderate course can win.
Yeah.
The moderate course can win. And Biden has made a lot of compromises with Ron Klain. He's certainly moved over to the left. There's no doubt about it. He got rid of the Hyde Amendment. He tried to. You're not going to get rid of it, but these kinds of decisions. He was for busing. Most people were against busing, rather. And he's had to pay for all these sins of the past. I personally think it's a strange argument to
Here's
make.
my
I don't
last-
think you could win as a ward leader anywhere. Yeah.
My last.
I think
question.
you've
made that clear.
Yeah,
I
No,
get
no,
your
no. I just said
perspective.
where would you want to be the political boss? Where can you be a political boss?
Well, I'm just.
No, with your point of view.
Oh, with my point of view.
Yeah, where
Do you
would
think this line of questioning is fair that he's throwing at her? I'm not sure it's fair.
What is if she had political power, she wouldn't
Like
know
where
how
are
to
you?
use
Like
it?
he's like, where are you gonna win elections? Where are you gonna be the person in charge?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, you know,
it's. I mean, fair. All's fair in this interview. That's for sure. I mean, like,
well, it's funny because it's like I agree that they started off too aggressive, but then he's like, well, I'm gonna like turn it up to like 20. Or maybe
Why-
20. He's like, I'm gonna turn it up to 12 in response, which I mean, I think it's hilarious. I think it's funny.
blabbing on the internet about your opinions is, I mean, pretty easy.
Sure, I
Winning
agree.
elections, I think, is a much higher bar. Much higher
Sure,
bar.
sure,
so.
but yeah, but you want people. I would argue you want people in the political pundit space that are giving their opinions to not just be solely focused on winning elections. You want people to give differing views on things.
Of course.
Now to be
of course.
now to be clear, she is making the argument that she thinks Bernie would have won. So she's making a specific argument towards winning electoral victories. But
Yeah, yeah. It's more complicated than just running TV ads.
right, I just want to go to the 40-minute mark and then we'll stop.
Okay, perfect.
you go with that bit? Where would
Well,
you
I
take
mean, I
that?
support populist economics. I
No,
think
no,
it's overwhelmingly supported by the American people.
No. Tell me where you would win.
I'm not looking to be a ward leader anywhere, Chris.
Where are you going to win? Where are you going to win?
I'm happy to be.
Where are you going to
right
win with this
here.
argument?
Well, obviously, it hasn't won in a Democratic primary, especially given the fact that, I think Democratic voters are very concerned about electability, and I get that from a perspective. But my view is the media really shaped and informed those Democratic primary voters of who was actually electable and who wasn't, and that the evidence that was an opinion.
Let me just say this: if I had wielded this kind of power in my role for 26 years, I would have felt it, and I never felt it.
Okay.
I felt I was up against the left, and I had to argue with them. I felt I had to challenge people like Hillary included. I think the idea that Hillary was too conservative for the country is ridiculous. It's
Well, there
ridiculous
was a lot
argument.
going on with Hillary.
The idea that
Yeah, but you
was,
talked about
that-
likability.
No,
Wasn't that an issue?
not in that context.
Yeah.
Hillary's
It's just so fascinating because she views it, and we've heard this narrative a lot, that like the media, they could, if they had sold people, like basically the left wing, the further left wing view is that all American people want populism or socialism, but they just don't know it, right? They just don't know what's good for them. They all want this thing, but they just don't realize it. And the only thing that's stopping them is like the media is kind of selling a narrative that these policies are either bad or that they're unelectable. And that's the only thing kind of stopping the revolution, so to speak, from kind of sweeping into the country. And I just frankly don't buy that argument at all.
No, look, and this is a perfect example of what I was talking about manufacturing consent. That
Right.
is a belief in the manufacturing of consent, and the media is withdrawing its support for manufacturing that consent.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. I think it's the intuitions against socialism that are driving this ship.
Yes, 100%. I mean, and there's a reason why with BreadTube, it's all these kids, these kids that didn't have those moral intuitions that were basically drilled into them for 50 years of the Cold War.
Yeah, all those kids who don't vote.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. So maybe 30 years from now, socialism will be, more palatable on a ballot or something. But I don't think with Gen Xers and with Boomers, who are the primary voting base, I don't think it is.
Not only that, it's going to be a socialism that's like the government does things for me. It's not going to be a socialism that I don't get to own a home.
No, right. I'm just saying in terms of, because if Bernie won the primary, it would be, regardless of whether he would actually enact socialist policies, he would be framed as the socialist candidate. The
Right.
perception would be socialist.
Right, but I'm saying the definite, what people perceive as socialist will be much different.
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting that Chris basically is saying, listen, I never felt this power you're granting me. He
Right.
felt the opposite of it. So it's very fascinating.
Right.
He's a very likable in person.
Okay.
How
But how do the American people feel about it?
how they feel about how they react to her. Yeah, they obviously they went more vote for her than for him, but he won the Electoral College.
Right.
Yes.
And how could that happen in a world where Bernie rises supreme?
Well,
we don't
because
have to
he
litigate
tapped-
Bernie.
No, but when you say Bernie,
Yeah.
He
is
tapped
what
into a similar populist anger and backlash against the 40-year neoliberal consensus that brought us wars and bad trade deals and hollowed out a good portion of the country. So
I think they're
that's why I think
they're
Bernie would have been a
ideologically
better matchup
absolutely
against
different.
him.
Absolutely
But
different.
listen, it's a counterfactual.
Yeah.
We'll never know. I want to
We do
respect
know.
your
We
time,
know.
Chris.
Ask Bernie's foreign policy. Ask about the world.
Chris,
He sees it. It's
thank
totally
you.
different than
Thank you
Trump.
for joining us. We really appreciate your time. We weren't trying to. We
Yeah.
really want to
I
hear what you
think
have to
we've
say.
learned more about your point of view than mine.
Oh, people know my point of view, but
But it
yeah.
just doesn't sync with anything. I've been involved in politics, and I can tell you that the Bernie argument. He's a likable guy. I don't see the country outside of Nevada and those primary voters voting for him.
Okay.
Nevada's a working class state.
I think
though.
you've made your position very clear, and we appreciate your time, sir.
Yeah,
So
thank you for
We
coming in,
haven't
Chris.
talked
It's nice
about
to
the
see
world
you.
today.
Okay, I'm gonna end it here. They literally, it's so funny. They're trying to end this. They go for another 4 minutes.
No, I know. I
Try to
know.
end the conversation. I agree partially with Krystal. I definitely, obviously, Bernie was tapping into the populist energy that I think arose because of the failures of neoliberalism. If Bernie Sanders was not a socialist, if that was not his history, right, was saying that he was a socialist, if he didn't have a history of going out and publicly supporting socialist leaders like Castro or whatever, if he was some young gun, right, if there was some Obama 2.0 who was just a young senator who never had a history of saying anything positive about socialism, and he kind of adopted a lot of Bernie Sanders positions and he had a lot of Bernie Sanders charisma, then I would 100% agree with Krystal that that person would have just destroyed, I think, Trump in an election.
Bernie advocated for privatizing the insurance industry, and I just that scares the hell out of voters. If he wouldn't
You
have,
mean public? You mean no? You said privatizing. You mean the opposite?
yeah, what?
Making it. He wanted to outlaw private insurance.
Yeah, what's that called? When the state takes over an industry.
What do you mean?
It's called something. But anyway,
I don't know where you're looking for, but okay. But yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, he wanted to outlaw private security.
He wanted,
private insurance.
He wanted to outlaw private insurance. Yeah, exactly. Right. He wanted to basically put them out of business and do it all through the state.
Right.
Medicare for all is basically a government takeover of healthcare.
Yeah, exactly.
That scares the hell out of people. If Bernie would have campaigned on a public option, which is kind of a medium step,
yes,
it might have been a completely different story. But with the background as a socialist and saying that you want to basically abolish private insurance, oh, hell no. People are not. Look, voters are not going to go for that. It's too much, too scary.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point because they'll throw, and I think Krystal and the people that were kind of more the Bernie people, they're focused too much on, in the primary, the Democrats are not going to super go hard on the he's a socialist angle in the primary.
Nationalize the health insurance industry. That's
right. But I'm just saying, you have to conceptualize the way that you have to. Oh, you nationalize. Yes, you have to conceptualize the way primaries and generals function very differently. And you can have a candidate that does very well in a primary and does very poorly in a general, or vice versa, depending on the types of attacks that's going to come to them. I think Bernie, they're too focused on how Bernie did in the primary and the perception and the energy he was gaining, because Bernie wasn't, first of all, he's only gaining left-wing support. He doesn't have to contend with the right. And he's not fielding the socialist. It was brought up, but it wasn't like being hammered 24/7. If Bernie was in a general, everything would be completely different. He'd get hit with the socialist stick. They would bring up, as you were talking about, having government run healthcare, making it illegal to have private insurance. And I do think it would have had substantial harm to him. And I'm not sure he could have won.
Yeah, he would have got destroyed.
Yeah, maybe. I can't tell. Maybe. I think it's very possible. So.
All right, let's read our $20 super chats and log off.
Okay. Brick Nose for $20. Thank you, Brick Nose. Says, I don't believe a single word of these allegations, but I think inquiries are fine regarding
Yeah.
the Biden thing. Dems should be open as possible to make the conspiracy theorizing harder. Obvious double standard versus Trump's obvious corruption, but whatever. Yeah, no,
I totally agree. Yeah.
completely. Yeah, I agree completely. I disagree with people that kind of say, "Oh, fishing expedition, we can't have these investigations." I'm always in favor of more investigations.
Me too.
Let the truth ring free. Obviously, it doesn't matter. Regardless of what the investigations bring, I don't think most people will change their opinion. But
And this is where the media totally fell down in the election stuff. They didn't publicize, like they didn't have good investigations. They didn't publicize them. They didn't assuage the public's concerns, which that's what they're supposed to do.
Right. Thanks so much, Mr. Ubercross, for 10 gifted memberships. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
And thank you, Lucy Lemonbug, for 5 gifted memberships, even though you're a
That's
dirty
awesome.
chopper. Understate for 20 Canadian says, former guest Shadiversity had the CC mob on Facebook. What is CC? Facebook
cancel culture.
Oh, okay. Come for him by spamming his HEMA colleague Matt Easton of Skulligatarian channel, who rolled over for them hours after meeting him in person and posting a photo of them. Oh, that's disgusting.
Yeah, I know. I responded to his tweet on Twitter. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I didn't know about this. Okay.
But
Disgusting.
yeah, no, obviously Shad's a great guy, and this cancel culture stuff has got to go. So
yeah. JMac for $20. Our surrogate father, JMac, says medical science also allowing for better prenatal imaging and viability beginning earlier is also a huge part of the population shift on abortion. That's a good point. That's definitely possible.
We're going to dig more into that because I am curious if that Democratic narrative is correct or not, or just propaganda. But so we go ahead and leave it there.
You know, it's funny. I realized that the sunglasses make me look not just like a cop, but like Biden. So thank you. So thank you. It's like the Biden meme with the ice cream. So anyway, we'll leave it there. Maybe we'll see you tomorrow. Maybe we won't. We'll see.
Okay. Bye-bye.